Hello and welcome back to Karma Stories. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today I have a 3-hour compilation of malicious compliance stories for you. This is a whole bunch of previous episodes from the channel that we've put together in one place so that you don't need to change your episode and can go about what you're doing over the course of your day. Whether you're working or driving or just doing things around your house, this is 3 hours of malicious compliance to help you get through your day. Alright, on to the stories. Let's jump right in. This story comes to us from Rabid Rathian. Wipe my computer? Sure thing. You didn't say anything about saving the important information on it first. Inspired by a few recent posts, I thought I'd tell the story of malicious compliance committed many years ago by my friend. We'll call her Samantha, who worked and still works as an accountant. She wasn't a manager or anything, but she had been there for more than 5 years and basically knew so much about how the place ran that she really was a manager in all but title. Samantha was told that she would be stepping down to a lower position and therefore lower pay for operational and restructuring reasons, but it was really so that the boss's daughter could replace her. The boss also told her that she would be responsible for training his daughter, who not only had no accounting qualifications, but had never even held so much as a fast food or retail job. The boss estimated it would take several months to train her. What went unsaid was the fact that Samantha would inevitably be given the boot altogether as soon as her replacement was somewhat competent. So at this point, she knew her days there were numbered. Samantha quite rightly said, no, if she needs that much training, she's not fit for the job. So the boss made life miserable for a few months until she had to quit for her own well-being, which worked out for the best as she had a new job in less than a fortnight. The day she left, the boss stood over her with his daughter, claiming that she was the new supervisor to add insult to injury, and demanded she wipe her company computer. Still having some sense of morality, even though this boss didn't deserve it, Samantha asked if he was sure and that he might want to take some backups from it first. Before she could finish speaking, he yelled over her to just get on with it and wipe it clean. She shrugged and did as she was told. What the boss didn't realize or had forgotten was Samantha had been instructed by him to create social media accounts and pages on various platforms for their accounting company's branch several years earlier, but that because the boss was anal and paranoid and didn't want them linked to any of their official company emails for some reason, he told her to set them up with her own email account and manage their social media promotion posts in her own name. Not wanting to do that, she created a new email account through Outlook or whatever and used that instead to set up the accounts on Facebook, Instagram, etc. Boss called her in a panic about a week after Samantha had quit because his daughter had tried to access the Facebook account so they could post some advertising in the lead up to tax time, but couldn't even log in. Samantha said she no longer had the details of the login credentials and passwords and couldn't help him. He said, "You must have written them down somewhere." She replied, "Yes, they were in a notepad document on the desktop of my computer." The computer that had been wiped the day she left the company. OP added an edit down at the bottom. It says, edit for the comments asking for further fallout. Apparently after a few months with the boss's daughter supervising, he was forced to rehire someone else to do the job because, as Samantha had tried to tell him, his daughter was woefully inadequate for the position and had no idea what she was doing. Not sure if there were any tangible consequences for that, aside from the hassle and expense of hiring someone new, but at the very least, it would have been inconvenient for him. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called I Don't Want to Sign In. It says, Samantha standing up for herself in the face of blatant nepotism is a wonderful thing. Samantha, you rock, and that's exactly what should happen when this crap goes down. Great malicious compliance story to boot. Another commenter down below called Furtive Fox 88 said, forgot password? No problem. We sent a reset link to the email account that you can't access either. Opie responded to this one and said, I like to imagine their souls leaving their body as they realized this was exactly what would be happening. In your workplace, if you realize that all of a sudden you're tasked with training your replacement, then find another job very quickly. And then, maybe have some fun with that training. Teach them the wrong ways to do some things, but make sure it sounds like it's right. Make sure that they know how to do everything you did, just make it 3 times longer, or something like that. There's a lot of fun ways that you could play around with this one. But as soon as you have that other job, you don't owe anything to your current workplace. Get out of there. Bye-bye. Have a great day. This story comes to us from Norziak. Some malicious railroad compliance. Train driver here somewhere in Europe. I recently remembered a case of malicious compliance I was involved in years ago. During a typical early shift, we were usually driven from our depot to the train yard by a van. This yard was rather large, stretching for kilometers with countless tracks. Every day, each and every train set and locomotive goes through a thorough inspection, with safety systems and brakes being extensively tested. And we take these tests very seriously. If the excrement were to hit the fan, we would be in the front row quite literally. That day, one of the final tests failed. I couldn't resolve the issue myself, and the help desk didn't see an immediate solution either. So I called dispatch for instructions. Meanwhile, we were about 20 minutes away from the time I was supposed to leave. I would leave the yard empty, without passengers, to drive to my departure station. Hello, train 1234 here. I'm experiencing technical issues and cannot depart from the yard. Okay, fine. We have a spare on track L7. You can take that one. So I started walking there. L7 was about a 15-minute walk away from where I was standing. When I arrived there, 5 minutes before the intended departure time, I saw that this train hadn't been used for several days. The brakes, doors, and pantographs of a train all operate on air pressure. Since this train had been stationary for so long, the air reservoirs were completely empty. It would take at least 10 minutes just to start the preparation process, which itself would take at least another 20 minutes. Just as I put the train into service and the compressors were running to fill the reservoirs, I got another call from dispatch. Hello, train 1234 driver here. Dispatch here, are you ready to depart? No, I need at least another 30 minutes. If you can't depart within the next 10 minutes, it won't be necessary anymore. You do realize I just told you I need at least 30 minutes? Yes. Okay, understood. It wasn't uncommon for dispatch to try to pressure drivers like this, trying to get them to cut corners and depart as quickly as possible. After all, there was still some buffer time at the departure station, so it wasn't a very big deal if we had to leave somewhat later than intended. This tactic sometimes worked on young, inexperienced drivers, but not on the seasoned drivers like me. That day, I had just enough of being rushed through the mandatory safety tests. So I shut everything down, applied the parking brakes, slung my backpack over my shoulder, and began the long walk back to the depot. The instructions were clear: 10 minutes, otherwise it wasn't needed anymore. The fallout. Half an hour later, I got another call. Once again, dispatch. Driver 1234 here. Driver 1234, dispatch, is there a problem? Your signal is open, but your train isn't moving. No, I'm walking back to the depot on foot. But you told me you needed 30 minutes to prepare the train. And you told me that if I couldn't depart within 10 minutes, it wouldn't be necessary anymore. You know full well that's not what I meant. I'm expected to follow instructions, not read minds. A few days later, my direct supervisor, a veteran who always stood up for his men, called me into his office. Nor, what was the problem yesterday? He asked with a big wink. I honestly don't understand it myself. I was told that if I couldn't depart within 10 minutes, it wouldn't be necessary anymore. I needed at least 30 minutes, so I drew my own conclusions. Big wink in return. Dispatch says since all calls are recorded, we can easily find out what dispatch told me. Long story short, I never heard anything about it again. For the next few weeks, dispatch was noticeably more cautious when trying to rush me and my colleagues. But of course, it didn't take long before they fell back into their old habits. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Snickers Cowboy. It says, all fun and games until a major incident is caused by cutting corners. Hats off to UOP for standing your ground. Another commenter down below called Lurig Alban said, as a fellow train driver, I salute your adherence to safety protocols. We all know who would have been blamed if something happened and you would have cut any corners. And it wouldn't have been the dispatcher. These safety procedures on trains, which are heavy and don't stop quickly, are designed to save lives. So anybody messing with that and wanting you to cut corners on that, they don't belong in that industry at all, especially a dispatcher. Someone who is supposed to be organizing all of these train drivers. It just doesn't make sense to me. Fire that person as quickly as you can. Get somebody in there who understands how that industry works and that safety procedures save lives. This story comes to us from Caltastic84. Shut my mouth and do what I was told? Absolutely. When I was in college, I worked as a baker for a well-known regional bagel and sandwich chain. At some point, an assistant manager transferred to my store who was the stereotypical petty, power-tripping, ridiculous manager you find in this type of job. Her specialty was yelling at and berating employees in front of customers. I will never not believe that she enjoyed publicly humiliating people. It was tolerable until I agreed to cover a shift at the store she transferred from. Someone there asked me what I thought of her. I thought I was careful, as I just commented that she had very high expectations, which were hard for some people to meet. Understatement of the year. Well, this lovely person passed this back to her, which shot me to the top of her crap list. What followed was a series of write-ups for egregious violations like missing some seeds when mopping the floor or not emptying a garbage can that had a single paper towel in it. Luckily for me, I was one of the few people there certified to run the ovens. My opportunity for malicious compliance came one Saturday lunchtime when a charter bus pulled up. I'd seen this before and knew that a bus full of people buying sandwiches is equivalent to 2 to 3 people bringing bagels to work. Barely a blip compared to morning rush. I went to the counter to help and Miss Assistant Manager yells at me to get back in the kitchen and start baking more. I tried to tell her we were fine, but as soon as I opened my mouth, she yelled, "Shut your mouth, do what I told you, and don't stop baking until I say stop." 2 important things to know is that first, when I took my certification test, they told me I passed it with the second fastest time on record for the local franchise. The second thing is that the ovens were adjustable. You could turn up the heat to speed up the cooking process. I went back to the baking area, cranked up the oven, and baked as fast as I possibly could. The ovens had 8 shelves, holding about 48 bagels each. Eventually, I had them all filled up, and was only gated by how fast they could cook, and I could send them up front. Miss Assistant Manager was down at the register this whole time, and was not paying attention to stock levels in the bagel bins. I kept bringing out shelf after shelf. At one point, the bins were overflowing, so I had to start putting them in extra bins we kept in the back. Once those were full, I started putting them on metal trays. The crowd finally died down, and Miss Assistant Manager finally looks at the bagel bins and realizes she never told me to stop. She asked me if there was anything still baking, and I informed her that every shelf was full. She lost it and started yelling that I was getting fired, until multiple people pointed out that I just did exactly what she asked. The store manager ended up coming in, and pretty much everyone told them the exact same story. Miss Assistant Manager had to bag up the mountains of excess bagels and drive them to all the other stores in the area so that they wouldn't go to waste. Even after all that, we still exceeded the allowed wastage for the day, and she was reprimanded. She still yelled at everyone after that, but she was at least more careful in her wording. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Still Not Elf. It says, sounds like she's got the same managerial skills as the hole in the middle of a bagel. Also, I'm very interested in an oven where you can go hotter to make things cook faster. What other foods does that work on? Another commenter down below called Rodeo Industry Baby said, I always praise in public, punish in private. Sometimes things need addressed. Nobody else needs to know about it. Do a great job and I will tell the world. I never understood petty tyrant managers. They just make their job harder. Right at the beginning of this story, OP said that the assistant manager's specialty was yelling at and berating employees in front of customers. Yeah, that is not the kind of manager that you want. I had one of those one time. You guys have heard about him many times on here, and all I'm gonna say about him is, screw you, Rick, screw you. The best thing you can do with that kind of manager is anytime they do something wrong, try and call them out in front of people as well. Or if that doesn't work, just go above their head and report them to the managers above them, which didn't work in my case because Rick's boss was somebody he had worked with for 26 years. Think about that for a second. These guys were like this, right? They were together 26 years, area manager, store manager, and there was just no way around that. So it was a lose-lose situation. So let's extend this one a little bit today and let's say, screw you, Rick, and screw you, Tony. All right. This story comes to us from Cynical Mage, Bakery Catastrophe. To preface this, I'll explain how the bakery worked. Each day we had a baking plan. Based on sales figures, etc., head office generated that plan. Come afternoon time, said plan would also tell you how many of each item you should have available. So if you had 10, the plan stated 23, you would have to bake 13. Enter our new fledgling area manager. He decides that, actually, the bakers need to bake whatever the full amount for the afternoon says. Now, I tried to warn him. I begged the store manager. I knew what would happen, but orders are orders. I was thoroughly bollocked and told to do my job. So much waste. Instead of 30 pounds appropriately worth of product per evening, we were hitting nearly 300 pounds. Halfway through the week, store manager tries approaching me about the write-offs being a bit higher than usual. So could I figure it out, but still do the full bake as requested from above? After a week, area manager and store manager both broke and admitted I was right, and they had to take their own bollocking from head office. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Velvet42. It says, how can someone be in any kind of retail management and not understand how a par level works? You know, never mind. I worked in retail long enough that I should know better than to ask that question, laugh out loud. OP responded and said, you want to know the real beauty? This brand new area manager had zero retail experience. He came straight from university. His qualifications lifted him over and above the hierarchy, on paper at least. What we got was a fresh-faced 22-year-old that hadn't even had a part-time job of any description. Another commenter down below called CHMath80 said, seen this sort of thing a lot. Used to get boxes of bagels delivered to the supermarket, sometimes 30 boxes, different varieties, 8 bagels to a box. There might be 15 to 20 boxes left unsold by the best before date. Occasionally, the delivery guy would turn up and we would give him more boxes of returns than he was delivering of new stock. This went on for a couple of years. We didn't care because they were sale or return, but it was obviously very wasteful, and I had to wonder how they managed to stay in business. How hard could it be to keep a record of sales at each store and use that to decide on production and delivery quantities? No, that's too hard. Let's just keep wasting a fortune making thousands of bagels every week that we're never going to get paid for. OP responded to this one and said, that hurts my soul. I loathe food waste. I've been hungry and homeless, and every day so many people are dying for lack of food. One thing I kind of broke the rules with was, at cleanup during whenever I was on a closing shift instead of morning baking, I implemented a routine of loading up a couple of trays with an assortment of pastries and donuts to put in the canteen for the night team. The food was counted and written off, but at least some of it was eaten instead of scraped into a bin. A lot of bagel shops, donut shops, coffee shops have tons of waste at the end of the day. When I was quite a bit younger, we used to make it a thing of going around to the back of the Tim Hortons locations in the town I grew up in because they'd always put them out in a big barrel behind the store, and it was feast time for anybody who showed up there. They weren't bad, they weren't covered in anything, they didn't toss them in the garbage bin, they were just in a big barrel. So if you took the ones from the middle that hadn't touched the outside of the barrel, it was good eating. Besides, it was going to pig feed anyway, so I could be a bit of a pig, right? This story comes to us from Dan14, Malicious Compliance in the 1930s. Here's a story that was passed down to me by my mom. My mom's great uncle survived polio as a child in the early 1900s. but his lack of physical ability drove him to books and learning. He did very well academically and graduated with honors from a prestigious university. My mom has his diploma, his grade sheets, and even a personal letter of recommendation from the university president. Despite his physical disabilities, he went on to become an accomplished high school teacher. After many years of successful teaching, the administration began to enforce a policy that all teachers must be certified and pass a teaching exam. He agreed to take the test, but he was so insulted that they would question his academic qualifications that he threw in a little malicious compliance. He answered all the questions in Latin. Since no one on the staff could read his answers, they just dropped the issue, and he was allowed to continue his teaching. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Bonnie Sue 1948. It says, I had an English teacher in high school who survived polio. I could totally see him doing this, except he would have written it out in Middle English. So are we saying that back in the 1930s in a school setting, nobody there was able to read Latin? Does that kind of sound to you guys like maybe the teachers should have been going back to school? Because I'm pretty sure that Latin was a very common thing back in the 30s. This story comes to us from Texas Ford Tough. The cheerleaders can break dress code because they're school uniforms? Guess I'm wearing mine. Back in 2013, when I was just a sophomore in high school, there was an unofficial Friday tradition. Each Friday, the cheerleaders, football players minus their pads, band members, and a few other performance groups would stroll into class wearing their uniforms. This wasn't written in any handbook, but it had been a long-standing custom that no one seemed to question. The only real dress code violations came from the cheerleaders and dance teams, whose uniforms were generally shorter than the rules allowed. But because they were official school uniforms, nobody made a fuss. I wasn't usually the type to wear skirts, but every once in a while I liked wearing a dress. Since I grew up in Texas, anyone familiar with the weather there knows how hot it can still be in August and September. So one warm day in September, I decided to wear a casual sundress that ended about 4 inches above my knee. Unfortunately, the dress code stated that any skirt or dress needed to be no shorter than 2 inches above the knee. To my surprise, partway through the school day, I got pulled out of class by a teacher and sent to the office. The assistant principal reprimanded me, pointing out that my dress was a couple of inches too short. Trying to stand up for myself, I mentioned that the cheerleaders and dance team members wore skirts that hit around mid-thigh every single Friday. The assistant principal shook her head and told me that was different because students can wear official school uniforms. Then she sent me home to change. I left school that day feeling annoyed and singled out. As I made my way back home, my mind started racing with ideas. I remembered something important. I was on the school's golf team. The following Friday was only a few days away, and I had a plan. Our school had recently upgraded the golf team's uniforms the previous year. For the girls, the uniform consisted of a short-sleeved collared polo shirt with the school's logo and a matching skort. If you've never heard of a skort, it's basically a skirt with built-in shorts, like bike shorts underneath. Ours were quite short, possibly even shorter than the cheerleaders' uniforms. That Friday, I got ready for school wearing my golf uniform instead of packing it in my gym bag like I usually did. When my parents saw me, they were a bit puzzled, but I shrugged and said, "It's Friday, so I'm allowed to wear my sports uniform to class." They didn't press the issue and drove me to school. By second period, as expected, I was called down to the assistant principal's office. The moment I walked in, she glared at me. She asked why I was deliberately disobeying her right after our last conversation, and threatened me with an in-school suspension. She went on and on about how I'd never get anywhere if I kept ignoring authority. It took her a while to stop talking and let me respond. When I finally got the chance, I calmly explained, "This is the official school golf uniform. You told me students could wear official school uniforms to class, so why is it okay for the cheerleaders but not for me? Besides, this isn't even a regular skirt, it's a skort, so there are shorts underneath." She sat there staring at me with a cold, furious look, and for a few seconds, I was genuinely worried she might explode right then and there. Finally, she snapped and told me to wait in the lobby. She said she would be calling my parents about my blatant disrespect. I walked out to the front office area, my heart pounding. As much as I was trying to stand my ground, I absolutely hated being in trouble. My anxiety was through the roof, and it took a lot to hold back tears. To distract myself, I fiddled with my iPod, made small talk with the school secretary, and tried to maintain an outward sense of calm. Deep down, though, I was worried about whether I had taken things too far. After about 20 minutes, the assistant principal popped her head out of her office and said, in the most monotone voice, that I could go back to class. She also told me to inform my teachers that I had received permission from the front office to wear my golf uniform. Then, almost as quickly as she'd appeared, she shut the door behind her. Somewhat dazed, I returned to my classes. Most of my teachers seemed baffled by my outfit and asked if I was sure I was allowed to wear it. At least 2 of them called the front office to confirm my story. Each time, they received the same response: yes, I had permission. By the end of the day, I headed off to golf practice as usual, still wearing the uniform that had caused all the fuss. When I got home, my dad was waiting by the front door. He gave me a small, knowing smile as I approached. Curious, I asked him what had happened. I knew the assistant principal must have called him since he was the primary contact for my school. He told me that when she called, she expected him to come pick me up and punish me for my insubordination. Instead, he argued with her, raising his voice more than he'd intended. He demanded to know why I couldn't wear my official team uniform, one that the school itself had given me for practice and competitions. He then suggested taking the issue to the school board if they were going to enforce different rules for different teams. Apparently, faced with my dad's determination, the assistant principal decided to back down. My dad ended his story by gently asking me not to push my luck like that again, though he admitted he was proud of me for standing my ground. "I've always told you never to start a fight," he said, "but always to fight back if you have to. I used to mean it in a physical sense, but you sure showed you can fight back verbally." I grinned, relieved that I wasn't in serious trouble. That day felt like a small victory for every student who'd ever been singled out under confusing or selectively enforced rules. It also proved that sometimes standing up for yourself and doing so calmly is the right thing to do, even if it means a tense showdown in the assistant principal's office. OP added a few edits down at the bottom. The first one says, Edit 1, to my fellow 20-somethings, I'm truly sorry for reminding you that 2013 was over 8 years ago. And if you end up finding a few gray hairs, please don't waste too much time staring at yourself in the mirror. Edit number 2 says, I'd also like to apologize to everyone in their 30s to 60s. I know my first edit might have been even more of a reality check for some of you. Let's just say time flies, and we're all in this together. OP added a third edit that says, there's one detail I want to clarify about the band uniforms. The band members didn't wear those thick wool uniforms to class on Fridays. Instead, they had custom t-shirts and nice pants. Their directors enforced that dress code strictly every single week. And the final edit says, lastly, to the folks who are in their 30s or 60s or any age, I'm sorry if I didn't include you specifically before. Those responsible for the earlier edits have been properly reprimanded. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Nat1Common It says, great story, great malicious compliance, but let's not gloss over the fact your dad was prepared for you to throw down at school. OP responded and said, oh yeah, laugh out loud. My school district had a zero tolerance policy for fighting, so even if you defended yourself, you got in just as much trouble. My dad was pissed off when he found out this policy when I moved to the district in middle school, and that's when he told me that line, and that he would fight tooth and nail if he found out if someone jumped me, and I got in just as much trouble for defending myself. Another commenter down below called Disciplined Cheddar said, this is the first post I've read in this subreddit mentioning being anxious about authority and trying to hold back the tears, but still defending oneself. Thank you for sharing your story, but also that small detail, as it encourages me to speak for myself too. I love all the edits that OP put on this one because there were a ton of people down in the comments realizing just how long ago 2013 was. Because if you think about it, it's only like 3 or 4 years ago, right? It's totally not 10 or 12 years ago. Coming from someone who graduated before the 2000s, I think I'd just like to stop talking about this now. This story comes to us from Ding Dong De Long Wong. Everybody must know when I am out of office. So yeah, a couple of years ago, I was working for an IT company which also provided server management and general domain and email services. We had some really big companies as clients, so we were used to some really idiotic demands. But most of the time, we could convince the people whose main job seemingly was to be in charge to listen to our expertise. Not so Mr. Bigwig. Mr. Bigwig was the CEO of a large automobile sales company. He also was the type of guy who prided himself with being a great negotiator and thinking so far ahead regular people can't follow. And he was a complete butt to everyone. Mr. Bigwig went on a holiday once and set up an automatic out-of-office reply in his mail account, but as is the technical standard, everybody who wrote him during that time only received the reply just one single time. When Mr. Bigwig returned from his vacation, this infuriated him a lot, so he called our support line and yelled and cussed his way up our hierarchy until he had me on the phone. I tried to tell him that this was working as intended and tried to explain why, but Mr. Bigwig wouldn't have any of it. This went all the way to our CTO, who sent him a waiver to sign stating that we would deactivate this limitation but not be liable for any consequences, in short. Then he told me to make the changes to Mr. Bigwig's account. I tried to object, but the CTO just smiled, shrugged, and went into his office. Mr. Bigwig was happy. He won, and booked this as his latest negotiating victory. Now let us jump to December the 29th of the same year. I get a phone call from Mr. Bigwig. He is not happy. He's not happy because he is blacklisted on about every blacklist in existence. He is also not happy because he can't receive or send any email. And he is not happy because he can't find any mail he received during the Christmas holidays, or near them. He can't find them because the nice number in brackets beside his inbox folder that indicates the amount of unread emails he has reads 50,000. A quick look around the server logs tells me there are indeed some mails he did not receive, 150,000 to be exact. They are still pending delivery because his inbox is full. He is also not happy because he is the laughingstock of everybody he ever respected. Now, let me guide you as the reader to the bottom of this. What you don't know, and we also did not know at the time, is Mr. Bigwig was a member of a very exclusive group of business owners, CEOs, and high-ranking politicians around the globe. The kind of people you would imagine sitting around a large oak table, smoking cigars, drinking €200 whiskey, and discussing world dominance. This group had a mailing list, a crappy, basic mailing list. It went something like this: Bigwig, out of office reply, "Hey, thank you for your email, but I'm on holiday. I will reply later." Some random dude at mailing list, "Merry Christmas." Mailing list to everybody, "Hey guys, some random dude is wishing you a Merry Christmas." Bigwig on the mailing list, "Thank you for telling me, but I'm on holiday. I will reply later." Mailing list at everybody, "Hey guys, Mr. Bigwig is on holiday. He will reply later." Bigwig to the mailing list, "Thanks for telling me, but I'm on holiday. I will reply later." Mailing list to effing everybody, "Hey guys, Mr. Bigwig is on holiday. He will reply later." Bigwig to the mailing list, "Thanks for telling me, but I'm on holiday. I will reply later." Mailing list to effing everybody, "Hey guys, Mr. Bigwig is on holiday. He will reply later." Bigwig to the mailing list, "Thanks for telling me, but I'm on holiday. I will reply later." Mailing list to effing everybody, "Hey guys, Mr. Bigwig is on holiday. He will reply later." Repeat until the servers give out. So Mr. Bigwig was not the only one who had thousands and thousands of emails in his folder. All his fancy pants networking contacts had too. Mr. Bigwig raged hard at everyone who was brave enough to get on the phone with him, threatened to sue us for millions of euros, and to end us as a business. We finally put him through to our founder, who listened to his rant and told him we would send him a solution within the next 10 minutes. He sent 2 documents, a scan of the signed waiver, in which the consequences of disabling the out-of-office message restriction were outlined in detail, and a service contract allowing us to fix the problem to our abilities without any financial budget limitations, but with a really nice, enormous estimated budget. It was a good year for the company, with an unexpected spike in revenue just before New Year's Eve. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called NowUC. It says, I thought it was going to be that another out-of-office response kept replying to his, and it just went on and on. But this is so much better. Not only has he lost his crap and all the company's communications, but he's effed up the main form of communication for the top 20 city CEOs, or whatever they are, as well. Right around that critical end-of-year period. Your founder's way of dealing with this is perfection. So if we look back on this one, they explained the consequences of the actions to the CEO, and the CEO still said, do it because I'm more important and I know what I'm doing. Obviously, that is completely false. This CEO does not know anything about tech, and especially how emails work. While this CEO may be the laughing stock of all of his CEO friends right now, it is actually going to be a hilarious story for them to tell in the future when they're sitting around with their glasses of whiskey and having conversations about all the things that really matter in the world. You know, like selling Teslas at the White House. This story comes to us from Gromulox. Parent says it's not our business what her son does on the community garden, so we let him get up to his neck in crap. Literally. Happened just a couple of hours ago. This story is so fresh, you can still smell it. On our community garden, we get teams of kids from the local school come to help, and it's often the case that they turn up on a Saturday morning as well. They're almost entirely well behaved, which is a good job, as there's not a lot we can do about bad behavior beyond a stern voice. Although one time a lad kicked one of our rabbits, so a girl brained him with a shovel. Rough but effective justice. There's this one lad who came for the first time last week. Don't know him, but we made him very welcome. He only lasted half an hour before storming off in tears after his third telling off for spinning round and round, holding a tool, and then letting it fly off at head height. This morning his mom, I assume, came with him. I saw him point out my friend and me, but he didn't ask to join in, so after shouting hello, we let them be. After about 10 minutes, he started wandering, and my friend shouted to him, "Don't go round behind the greenhouse, mate, it's not safe round there." Well, his mom had obviously been waiting for this because she went 0 to 100 in 2 seconds flat, demanding to know, do we own this garden? And if not, what business is it of ours where her son goes? We explained we just want him to be safe, and she replied that she's quite capable of taking care of that herself. Thank you. Fine, on you go. Off he went, exploring behind the greenhouse, which is not safe because it's the compost heap, which is very unstable, and the muck mound, which is a giant pile of horse manure we get delivered every autumn. By the spring, the inside is all nice and rotted down, and the outside is hard, crusty, and less strong than you may think. After a minute, there was a crunch, a squeal, and I think we did very well to drag him out without saying, "I told you so," or breaking into guffaws. He was absolutely black from chest height downwards, and although well-rotted manure doesn't smell really bad, it is very thick and sticky and slimy. His mom grabbed him without a word, and they headed for the gate. He started bawling as soon as the surprise wore off. My friend said, "Would you like some bin bags to spread out in your car?" And to her credit, she did say thanks when he handed them over. I wonder if we'll see him again next week. OP added an edit down at the bottom. It says, "Edit to everyone saying we should have made a point of some kind. If you're mean to kids or they think you're making fun of them, they just don't come back. Kids and adults do stupid crap all the time, and you quickly get into the habit of just dusting them down and getting on with things. Don't get me wrong, we definitely laughed about it later, but how's a little knobhead like this going to learn if he doesn't come back to the allotment and get his hands dirty?" Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a deleted account. It quotes OP when they said, Although one time a lad kicked one of our rabbits, so a girl brained him with a shovel, rough but effective justice. They said, cognitive recalibration via kinetic force is usually an effective deterrent. Another commenter down below called Raging Red Blue said, why wouldn't you say, I told you so? Those would have been the first words out of my mouth. I'd have had a big smug grin on my face too. Opie responded and said, just trying so hard not to laugh, honestly. Saw it coming, enjoyed it in full. Proper comedy squelch sound when we grabbed a shoulder each and yanked him out too. At least his shoes stayed on. You know, I was thinking on this one that they really should have made good with what the mother said. They said they could handle their kid themselves. Oh, well if that's the case, you can go pull him out by yourself too then. I just feel like there was no justice in this one, even though the boy did what he wasn't supposed to and ended up in poop. There should have been some justice for the mother as well, who was a bit of a turd herself. This story comes to us from Rear Engineer. Project manager said, if it's a problem, the pressure test will catch it. Alright then, let's find out. Back when I was a junior engineer, I was working with a piping contractor supporting a gas plant project that was in the final stretch before commissioning. We were under intense pressure to hit deadlines, and everyone was feeling the heat. One of my responsibilities was reviewing materials before installation. Basic quality control to make sure we weren't about to install something that would bite us later. Then the pipes arrived. These were large diameter, high pressure pipes for a critical gas line. But the moment I saw them, I knew something was off. The mill markings didn't match the material certificates, and some of the welds seemed to look rough. When we took a closer look, we found surface defects and laminations at the bevel, classic signs of poor quality steel from a dodgy mill. I flagged it immediately. My lead engineer took one look and agreed. These pipes weren't fit for purpose. We raised it with the project manager, expecting him to do the obvious thing, that is to reject the batch and order replacements from an approved supplier. But this project manager wasn't like most project managers. He wasn't an engineer, had a Bachelor of Commerce, and had landed the job thanks to his uncle, a senior executive. He had zero technical knowledge and didn't care to learn. To him, just another job to push through quickly to up his bonus. And rejecting the pipes would cause delays, something he was desperate to avoid, since it would probably affect his bonus. His response? The supplier says they meet spec, so they meet spec, just install them and move on. I pushed back, explaining that if these pipes failed under pressure, we were looking at a major incident. He waved me off. Just get it done. If it's a problem, the pressure test will catch it. Alright mate, let's see how that goes. The pipes were installed as is, and we moved on to pressure testing. I stood back and watched. As we ramped up the pressure, the pipe's weld seam split wide open and ruptured the pipe. The force of the failure sent a shockwave through the system, and a few of the pipe supports even bent. The pressure test failed spectacularly. Now, instead of a minor delay to replace the pipes before installation, we had a catastrophic failure that shut down work for weeks. The entire line had to be cut out, re-welded, and retested. The supplier was blacklisted, and an internal investigation was launched into how the pipes had been approved in the first place. We were also made by the client to bear the cost of the rework. As expected, the project manager tried to shift the blame, but my lead engineer simply pulled up the email chain where we had clearly raised the defect concerns. Management didn't take long to connect the dots. The project manager was taken off the project immediately and was sacked a month later following initial investigation results, and even his uncle couldn't save him. Never saw him again after that, and last I heard, he decided to pursue a career outside of the industry. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Craig White. It says, as an engineering manager who once was the junior and senior engineer himself, if someone raises a red flag, I push the stop button until at least 3 people, including the one that raised the red flag in the first place, prove to me we are good to go. It's okay to be a non-engineer project manager so long as you use the team wisely. Another commenter called One-Legged Stool said, the project manager is definitely to blame, but I would put some blame on the company for crappy process. Engineer and quality control should have final say if materials get used or not business. I say that as someone who is on the business side and deal with engineers and quality control every day on whether materials meet spec or not. OP responded and said, exactly. The real issue was that the process allowed someone with no technical background to override engineering and quality control decisions just to meet a deadline. If the system had worked properly, those pipes would have never made it past the gate. It's either comply or walk in that situation, which happens more often than not with smaller contractors that operate like cowboys. I feel like the major problem in this situation is the fact that the boss was a Nepo hire who had no experience in the area and didn't know how to be a project manager. In this case, it was a guy with the fancy title who didn't know how to do the job, but just wanted to throw his weight around. Like the first commenter said, it's okay to be a non-engineer project manager as long as you use your team wisely. All those people on that team are there for a reason. They know what they're doing, so listen to them. I don't understand why you'd stick your neck out so far when you have people who get the job done. Use them. Then you can sit back and just relax because things are running properly. This story comes to us from OKP3414. You want the engineering staff to do the ordering as well? You got it. So for those who are unaware, companies usually have engineering staff talk with engineering of parts suppliers, detail down the specifications and whatnot, and then the list goes to the purchasing department or the purchasing folks of that particular engineering department. This is because engineers don't want to involve themselves with 30, 60, 90 days due, terms and conditions of sale, validity of quotes, remember the correct quote PDFs because they have hundreds of them, and working with finance department to understand what is best for the overall financial health. Also, in fairly large companies, you have buyers dedicated for each vendor or buyers dedicated to certain products, like pneumatics, electrical, heavy-duty construction, mechanical components, made-to-order parts, etc. And the buyers themselves have internal pathways and routes so that each required product finds themselves with the correct buyer. Because the engineers are dicks, and to lower their workload, they will more often than not dump all the parts on a single buyer. A new VP comes in, sees buyers as bloat, fat to be trimmed, and makes a decision. He lays off 8 buyers in that engineering department, which makes whole factory material handling systems that handle nearly all the materials moving through multi-100,000 square footage from raw materials warehouses and yards to finished goods sections. We had to order the stuff ourselves. Before we did though, 3 senior staff engineers asked that to be sent in a department-wide email. VP does so. And now starts the compliance. Vendors ask, what due terms do you want? Not aware of how deep you have to go, engineers ask for the best price. Due in 15 days after delivery. Sure, let's do that. Turns out, that vendor usually was on a net 90-day due, because paying off in the next quarter would be more sensible. What department do you want me to bill it to? Of course mine, because I'm ordering it. Engineers blissfully unaware the billing happens by sales department as it gets easier to finally do profitability analysis since whichever sales department got the contract pays for the parts too. Turns out our department didn't have a single process or work route to get bills and pay them. Now, by the time we get to the bottom of the purchasing list, the offered quotes have expired, so we get back to vendor sales teams and get a new quote and wait, doing nothing much until we get quotes and then order stuff. End of quarter, department finances are a total massive effed up mess, 8-figure mess. CFO is red-faced, steaming from her ears, trying to find out what is going on. Engineers, oh, the best price was net due 15 days, so I selected that. Well, I was ordering it, so the bill should come to us. Why would other departments pay for the stuff that I'm asking for? Who asked you to do the ordering yourself? This is not your job. Everyone shows her the email. End of day, VP walked out to be never seen again. All the buyers who were let go were rehired, and all of them negotiated a pay increase of $6.50 an hour. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Melonians. It says, This is why I, as an engineer, can order whatever parts I like, and the finance people sort out pricing. I never get to see a bill. On the rare occasion I need to procure something, I establish that the firm can supply it, and I email parts and say, buy me this, I want it delivered here. See, this is the problem when somebody who doesn't know what they're doing comes into a company and wants to, quote unquote, trim the fat like they said. Well, they decide to trim that fat, but they trim it back a little too far and end up cutting through some of the tendons that keep that company working. This story is a prime example of why I believe that any managing person should be somebody who worked on the team previously, at least in one of the roles there, so they know exactly what it is that they're managing. And if they haven't worked on that team before, it should be a requirement that they do before they assume the manager role. Work 3 or 4 weeks here, get to know your team, get to know how things go, and then you're allowed to make decisions. This story comes to us from Tierra Di Capi. I will work on that Saturday, you put me on the roster. At my ex-place of work, they had the bright idea to switch the Saturday schedule. Instead of the rotation of 4 Saturdays, now people would be scheduled on either the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th Saturday of the month. Right. Those of you readers who have ever had to make work schedules already know when the problem will present itself. I repeatedly asked those planners before the introduction of the new roster if they were sure they wanted to implement this in this way. They repeatedly assured me yes, this will be a more clear schedule, and if everyone had a set Saturday, there would be no need for further planning. If you say so. I was assigned Saturday number 3, no problem with that. Now, I was the Veronica there, my other colleagues were not interested in stirring the pot, so the first month, no problem. The second month, 5 Saturdays. So the team that was assigned to the first Saturday had to show up for Saturday number 5. Then, on the first Saturday of the following month, the team from Saturday number 2 had to come in. And on Saturday number 2, yep, they expected team number 3 to be present. And they were, except for this Veronica. Even on the Friday before, 2 of my group, number 3 colleagues, mentioned to me something related to the next day. And I told those 2, oh, but I won't be there. But we're supposed to do the Saturday shift tomorrow. Not me. I'm assigned to Saturday number 3, not number 2. But we are on the schedule. Well, I don't know about you, but they told me I'm on the schedule for Saturday number 3, and tomorrow is the second Saturday, so it's not my turn. Definitely not. And what do you know, next morning, Saturday number 2, at 9:35, the phone rang at my house. We have to be at work at 9 o'clock to open doors at 9:30. You do understand that I had switched off my cell phone before going to sleep. My sister answered. I could hear her from my room, where I was leisurely lazing in my bed. Hello? Yes, she's home but asleep. Work? I'm sure she doesn't. She explicitly told me she's going to sleep in today because she isn't scheduled. Yes, I told her that. Absolutely not. We have an understanding that when she's sleeping late, I have to let her. I'm definitely not waking her up when it's her free Saturday. Yeah, I don't know about that. I can tell her to call you when she wakes up, but it's her free Saturday, so I can't guarantee that she will or when. My sister can also be a Veronica. Actually, she did not say the next words literally, but something in this direction. Well, not my monkeys, not my circus. Have a nice day. Goodbye. I had wanted her to say that probably someone must have made an error in the planning of the roster, but the monkey thing was also very cool. After she hung up, she came to my room and we had a big laugh. And the following Monday, not one of the people of the planning, nor my supervisor, nor any of the higher-ups dared to confront me about my absence on Saturday number 2, nor on the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. And on Saturday number 3, I was there, alongside the whole team of Saturday number 4. We had one surplus worker that day. But would you believe that I still had to send out an email every month to remind everyone that I will not work on Saturday number 1, nor on number 2. I will be present on Saturday number 3, but not on number 4, and absolutely definitely not on Saturday number 5. Yeah, I'm that petty. They kept on messing it up for almost a year. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Snoowords1252. It says, So, okay, they held on to the "you're on the first Saturday of the month," which is now the second Saturday of the month, rather than go back to "you're rostered on every fourth week." FFS. You must have been back on with your team by the end of the year, right? I feel like everybody who worked at this place should have come together and kinda coordinated that nobody showed up on Saturday number 5, because nobody was actually told that they had to work on Saturday number 5. They had 1, 2, 3, and 4, but there was no mention of a Saturday number 5. I find this kind of funny because there are 4 months out of the year that have Saturday number 5. Out of 12 months, that's a third of the year. So somebody in scheduling definitely didn't take that into account. I think OP needs to remember that there are strength in numbers. One person doing something that goes against the grain is an annoyance, but a whole bunch of people doing it is a problem that needs to be solved. This story comes to us from Lerock's Mummy. Manglement rides again. I submitted this as a reply to a previous post, but it seems like it should stand on its own. Sometimes it's not just software developers that are short-sighted. Manglement falls in that category too. My company changed their email processing system to a much more sophisticated program than what we were using. Before rolling it out, we all had to be trained on the new program, and I was scheduled for one of the last classes, which of course was delayed. Enter Manglement. They decided to run a test on the new program, so they asked my team to switch over to the new system for 2 hours so they could gauge how it would work. The first 2 times they tried this, I raised my hand and asked if I could continue to work on the old system as my training was not scheduled until X date next week. My request was granted. The third time they tried a test, my training class had been delayed again by this same Manglement member. Let's call him Paul. This time, my request to stay on the old system was denied. I told Paul I had no idea how to use that new system since I had not been in a training class, but he insisted I use it anyway. It might as well have been the controls of a spaceship. Nothing was labeled, and I had no idea what all those icons meant. I could see the incoming email, and I know how to type, so I replied to the email and then just sat there doing nothing. After about 20 minutes of sitting unproductive, Paul walks up to me and asked why I was not answering emails. I said, I did, it's right here. He said, why didn't you send it and move on to the next email? I replied, I don't know how. As I keep telling you, I have not gone through the training. Oh well, I needed a break from work anyway. Sometimes the only way to get your point across is to beat them at their own game. OP did add an edit down at the bottom. It says, edit. For context, this happened about 20 to 25 years ago, and we went from the Adante program to Kana. I don't think Adante exists any longer, but it was as simple as riding a bike versus running the space shuttle with Kana. Once I was trained on Kana and used it for a while, I was fine. Okay, I scanned over the comments on this one, and instead of singling anyone out, I can tell you that a lot of people down there were asking why the send button on an email interface wouldn't be readily apparent. Like, who made that design decision that you can't just look at it and go, oh, this is how I send an email? You actually have to have training to figure out how to send an email. That's horrible. This story comes to us from DobDob2121. You told me to treat it like a finished product. I used to work for a company that constantly, but carefully, innovated with its employees and technology. I had a very busy job that involved a lot of travel. The company had computers at each of its offices. Employees like me would use them to manage all of our complex jobs and travel arrangements, which were core functions of the company. One day, I was at an office, and some people from IT had a small table set up with a sign asking for 5 minutes of our time to help them make our computers easier and faster for us to use. I volunteered, and they had me sit at their table in front of a notebook. Each page in the notebook mimicked a redesign of the computer screens that we used. The IT testers asked me to interact with the mock-up just the way I would interact with the computer if I had just now walked up to it and found it like this. They wanted to see how ready their design was for employees to use without additional training. I tapped the buttons on the page mock-ups and they flipped to the resultant next screens in their notebook, all while using a stopwatch and making notes. I successfully logged in and navigated the menus to the function I needed. When I tried to use the function, however, I got stuck in an endless loop of trying to back out of it when I couldn't figure out how to use it. They kept flipping back and forth between two pages that each had a back button I was trying to use to get back to the menu. I stood up, grabbed my bags, and started to leave. They became quite animated and asked me to stay and complete a feedback questionnaire. I told them that I just had. If I had encountered a computer like that at work, I would have just gone to another computer, leaving my login active and compromising corporate security on that computer because it didn't work, and I didn't have time to figure out what was wrong with it and how to fix it. They said that they really needed more information in order to get it right. I said I agreed with them as I walked away. That redesign never got implemented. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Sir Dinadin. It says, "We use this type of paper prototyping for screen design and navigation, and it was quite successful. If the user gets stuck or asks for something that was missing, like a delete button, we would add a delete button to the screen and make a note to add screens supporting this function, then carry on testing. In the case you described, we would add a home button so you could break out of the loop and start again, or ask you where did you want to go and add the necessary button. It does not sound like these developers were trained properly on how to run this type of test. You need to start asking questions when the user has issues. One trick is to ask them to tell you why they pressed each button and what do they expect next. This is called thinking out loud. That's the whole point of this type of test, to find missing functionality or data." That's kind of where I got stuck on this story as well. When they started flipping back and forth between two pages and they let it continue, but didn't ask questions of OP on what they were actually trying to do, it's like, are you guys really understanding what your purpose is here? I think OP figured that out as well when they didn't want to answer any more questions at the end because they realized just how incompetent the testers were. So they walked away and wiped their hands of it. I don't blame them one bit. This story comes to us from Subway Smoothie. "You want me to disable half of my entire testing stage? Okay." Recently stumbled across this subreddit and remembered a story I thought you guys might want to hear. Unfortunately, my industry is kind of specific, so I will have to change some details and make some things vague to remain anonymous, but the core of the story is all there. The compliance. Years ago, I worked as a junior manufacturing engineer for a certain company building certain relatively complex products, and one of the stations I was responsible for was the first test station. We got the core mechanism and the electronic assembly of the products right off the production line, and I performed white box testing to ensure everything looked right and worked properly before sending it to a different station for assembly and black box testing. I'm trying to avoid talking about the specific testing methodologies used, hence white box and black box, because that's the best way I can describe it without being more specific. White box refers to testing it with direct access to all of the internal components, so you can measure all the different parts, verify that individual parts work correctly, etc. Black box refers to testing it after the entire thing has already been put into an enclosure and you no longer have access to the internals. So really, you're just verifying that the thing works and does everything it's designed to do. The product I'll talk about today, let's give it a codename of Azure, belongs to the greater family of blue products, which were all very similar, but may have had different configurations, slightly different parts, etc. Azure was a new product, and in the first few production runs, we saw failure rates of 20% plus at black box testing, the station after mine. When the engineers dug into it, they found that one of the relays on the electronic control board was fused shut on those 20% of units that failed. For whatever reason, they turned to me. They love blaming my station, and said that my station was causing it. For a bit more background, my white box testing station had powered off and powered on testing. In powered on testing, we turned newly built units on for the first time, which also meant that if anything was wrong with it, that would make it fail when powered on, it would fail at my station. That's why I was always careful to make sure that the initial powered off testing was thorough enough to cover as many of my bases as possible, so that when I powered it on for the first time, the unit wouldn't blow up. The design engineering team apparently didn't believe that. They were convinced that when I powered on Azure units for the first time at my station, the initial power surge was sending a big current spike through the relays, which was causing them to fail. Their proposed solution was to simply eliminate powered on testing during white box testing. This was a terrible idea, so I argued against it. 1. The power supply in my test jig is set to be as closely matched as possible to the actual power supplies we send out with these units into the field. That means if there was a power surge that was causing the failures, it's a design issue and would be occurring with units out in the field if I didn't power it on during white box. Design engineering team said that no, it must be an issue with my tester because they didn't believe there could be anything wrong with their design. 2. I pulled up the datasheet for that relay and showed that it was physically impossible for that relay to fuse in the circuit configuration it was placed in, with the amount of voltage my test jig could supply. Apparently, the design engineers ignored that entire page of my report. They didn't think a junior manufacturing engineer's analysis was even worth looking at, and trusted their own assumptions more. 3. I had yet to see a single unit that was proven to have a good relay before my station and a fused one after my station, which would have been the concrete evidence I needed to believe that my station was fusing the relays. Design engineering said, "We don't need concrete evidence, we're sure this is what's happening." 4. If we disable power on testing, we'll lose a lot of test coverage. The design engineers just went, whichever, we'll catch any issues at black box. This was a bad idea because our black box tester, while it could tell us that the unit wasn't working, could not tell us what part in the assembly was causing it not to work. Units that failed in white box had a 70% successful repair rate. Units that failed black box had less than 10%. At least without going back through white box. 5. Finally, I argued that we had other products in the blue family that went through the exact same test jig, using the exact same relay in the exact same circuit configuration, and hadn't seen any issues before. That last argument I made was a big mistake. What I said was, we have other blue family products going through that same jig with no problems. What the design engineers apparently heard was, we have other blue family products going through that same jig, and they're all killing relays, and OP hasn't noticed yet because he's incompetent. They came back at me twice as hard. I fought this as much as I could for 2 weeks before the order finally came down from my direct manager. As per directives from the design engineering team, all powered on testing was to be disabled from the test jig for all blue family products, not just Azure. For what it's worth, my manager was on my side for most of this and only gave me the order to avoid any unnecessary trouble when it looked like the company leadership was going to get involved. Well, fine. I went ahead and disabled powered on testing. As I predicted, all of the blue family products, cyan, turquoise, cerulean, etc., started seeing 3 times the failure rate at black box testing, and we were now stuck with a bunch of units that we didn't know how to fix. But that's besides the point. How about Azure? Same 20% failure rate. Nothing changed. Just as I said, my station wasn't killing the relays. So the design engineers went and took another 3 months figuring out what the actual cause of all the relay failures was, which, as it turns out, was some flaw with the way the black box test was being run, combined with some other part on the assembly that was under spec. I don't know specifics. I wasn't part of this conversation anymore. They spent a bunch of money and got it fixed, and never followed up with me saying, "Hey, looks like you were right, it wasn't caused by powered on testing at Whitebox," which crucially also means that I never got a directive to re-enable powered on testing. So we ran like that for a few months, me licking my lips all the time because I knew what was coming, and it was delicious. The fallout. See, there was another product in the blue family that I'll call Navy. Navy was a bit of an oddball because the client had some requirement that demanded microcontroller B be installed as opposed to microcontroller A on all of the other blue family products. That was the only difference, which meant I used the same test jig for it. We sourced microcontroller A from a vendor who also preloaded it with firmware we needed flashed on it. Years ago, we had also apparently done the same with microcontroller B, but the vendor for B that could pre-program them for us had shut down, and we could not find a single other vendor who could preload the firmware for us. That's when we turned to internal solutions. Someone found out that the test jig at my station, then managed by someone else, had direct access to the microcontroller's programming interface, so they developed a way to flash the firmware from my test jig. That meant we could now buy blank B units directly from the manufacturer, then flash it with the firmware ourselves. This was a great solution because not only were blank B units cheaper, flashing it during powered-on testing wouldn't add an extra step to our production process since it would just be a part of the white box testing step. Of course, flashing the firmware required the unit to be powered on. All of this happened years before I had joined the company and before most of the current crop of design engineers were involved with this project. This was, in fact, documented, but all of these products had gone through hundreds of ECNs, basically formal engineering notifications that something has changed with the product, and nobody was reading through hundreds of them to familiarize themselves with the entire history of the product. When they demanded I disable powered-on testing on all Blue family products, this microcontroller programming step for Navy was also disabled, meaning any Navy units we built would make their way over to black box testing with a blank microcontroller. I knew, but that was only because I knew exactly what my test did. I also knew that this was documented in an ECN from 8 years ago. I was probably the only person involved that knew, and I didn't say a word. After several months of not building Navy, a new production run finally starts. The newly built units pass my white box powered off testing. They then made their way over to black box testing and boom, 100% failure rate. What's more, this failure was a particularly tricky one, because as far as the black box tester was concerned, the unit could not even turn on. The reason was that the microcontroller in question held the firmware that controlled power delivery for the entire electronic assembly. So without that firmware, nothing worked. No lights, no output, no fans, no nothing. Which means they had a heck of a time trying to figure out what the issue was. That entire department went into firefighting mode, with everyone losing their minds over why this product we had produced for nearly a decade with high yields was suddenly failing at a rate of 100%. Not me, I was happily running production for other products. It dragged on for months, with the design engineers pursuing a dozen different leads and all of them fizzling out. Surprisingly, nobody ever approached me, because I guess their theory for everything was white box powered on testing kills units, and now that they had already asked me to disable powered on testing, they had no other theories for how I might have been affecting things. As far as they were aware, there was no problem with white box testing. I just sat back and pretended I wasn't even aware of what was going on while everything was melting down around me. The reveal. I decided that the moment someone asked me about it, I'd reveal everything. So several months down the line, when someone finally brought it up to me during casual conversation, I spilled it. Hey, did you hear about all the Navy units not turning on at Black Box? Oh, no, I didn't. Could it be because we're no longer programming the microcontroller at White Box? What? Within a day, I was called into a meeting with everyone. My direct manager, his manager, a few of the other manufacturing engineers, quite a few program managers, the design engineering team, even a VP, and told to explain myself. Well, I was told in no uncertain terms to disable powered-on testing a few months ago, and microcontroller programming is part of that process. I assumed that when the call was made, everyone was aware of the implications of taking such a drastic measure. I figured you had found a new vendor to pre-program the microcontroller Bs or something. You never told us. Yes, but I couldn't describe all of the hundreds of potential new failure modes skipping powered-on testing would now introduce. It would have taken me all week. The fact that Whitebox programs the microcontroller during the powered-on testing is documented in ECN 2082. Didn't you read that? I got off scot-free from that meeting. However, this then led to the VP, who was a former engineer by the way, investigating why the design engineers had called for powered-on testing to be disabled, which revealed that 1. They had ignored my well-founded, technically sound opinion, despite the fact that I was supposed to be considered the subject matter expert on white box testing. 2. Disabling powered on testing did not solve the issue. 3. Once powered on testing was disabled, the failures at black box tripled, leaving us with a bunch of defective units that we didn't know how to fix. And 4. Once it became clear that the cause was not powered on testing, they did not follow up and ask that it be re-enabled. I got a bit of flack for this part too, but in the end, the VP agreed with my viewpoint that if I disabled powered on testing and then heard nothing from the design engineers, I could assume the problem was resolved and had no need to follow up. In the end, nobody got fired or anything, but a few members of the design engineering team did receive a reprimand for their behavior during this entire event. For the entire time I was with that company, they tiptoed around me and never falsely blamed me for any issues again. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Tuba Toothpaste 0185. It says, "As a design engineer, sorry those guys were idiots. Where I work, we always make it a point to work closely with the guys in the shop and in testing. It's not about ego, it's about solving problems and getting good product out the door." OP responded and said, "Yep, some of the best design engineering teams I worked with during my time at that company were the ones who regularly visited the factory to see how their designs got built. Funny how actually understanding the manufacturing process also makes your designs better." Another commenter called Wendo NZ said, "How the heck did months pass and no one thought maybe it was a firmware issue and tried to manually flash a known good copy of the firmware?" OP responded and said, "Beats me. The only thing I can think of is that since all the other products in the family use pre-programmed microcontrollers, to my knowledge, we had never once in the history of the product family encountered an issue that was fixed by reflashing the microcontroller. Maybe they went months under the assumption that this microcontroller was pre-programmed too. I think the entire time they were trying to probe out all of the traces and components in the power rails. I don't know, that entire team was one of the least effective teams I worked with in my entire time at that company, honestly." OP says that team was the least effective team that they worked with. Yep, I can definitely see that, because if all of a sudden one of your products has a 100% failure rate, you need to go back through the steps that that product has been going through and see what has changed recently. You'd honestly think that would be the first thing they would do. I guess what we can take away from this one was, because nobody was fired, everybody there did learn a valuable lesson, and a good portion of that lesson was, OP knows what they're doing, maybe you should listen to them. This story comes to us from Sad Codman. "You want me to clean the office exactly like that? Alright, I'll do it." I work as an office cleaner for a small company. My job description is pretty straightforward, but there's one manager who insists on giving very specific instructions on how she wants the office cleaned. I'm used to a little guidance, but this manager, let's call her Karen, has taken it to a whole new level. One day, Karen gives me a very detailed list of things she wants done during my shift. One item stood out: clean the kitchen counters with the exact brand of cleaner in the back storage room. No other cleaner will do. Okay, no big deal. I've cleaned the office plenty of times, but this was the first time I'd been given such a specific request. So I go back to the storage room and grab the cleaner she mentioned. No problem. But then I notice something odd. The cleaner she wants me to use is way past its expiration date and smells like chemicals that shouldn't even be used in an office. I'm talking a strong, toxic smell that could easily knock out a small animal. I thought about going to her and mentioning the expired cleaner, but then remembered her exact words: "No other cleaner will do." So I decided to follow her instructions exactly, despite the potential risk of making the kitchen smell like a hazardous waste site. I started cleaning the counters, and the smell filled the whole office. Employees walking by covered their noses and commented on how bad it smelled. One even asked if there had been a chemical spill. But I didn't stop. I just kept cleaning the way Karen had instructed. The smell was unbearable, and people were starting to get visibly irritated, but I just kept wiping down those counters, making sure I was using the exact brand of cleaner. Finally, Karen came out of her office, saw the situation, and took a deep breath. "What is that smell?" she asked, coughing a little. I calmly said, well, you asked for the counters to be cleaned with the exact brand of cleaner in the back storage room, and that's what I used. She went completely silent and then muttered something about being more specific next time before quickly retreating to her office. I just stood there, watching the employees scramble to open windows and air out the office. I knew I'd followed the instructions exactly, and if she wanted to be that specific about the cleaner, well, that's her problem. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Dinko from the North. It says, how long did it take for the stench to die down? OP responded and said, took a few hours for it to die down completely, but it was mostly gone in maybe half an hour. Another commenter down below called Georgie Keith said, seems like you missed an opportunity to be a human adult here. Had you approached her and asked, are you sure you want me to use this specific thing? It's expired and smells nasty. She would have agreed, let you clean using your preferred method and materials, and trusted you to make decisions on your own going forward. Instead, she now probably thinks you're a robot lacking common sense that can't be trusted on their own and needs constant supervision and guidance. So I can see where OP thinks that they maliciously complied with what the boss wanted, but I can also see the point of a whole bunch of commenters underneath this story that said this was tremendously stupid of OP, because that chemical smell being that strong could have caused severe respiratory distress to somebody in that office. I think if this were me, upon first smell, I would take that bottle right back to the person who told me to use it, make sure that was the one they wanted to use, and then have them put it in writing, so that all of the liability fell on them and not on you. This story comes to us from Hot Independent 1683. Want me to load the dishwasher that's full? No problem. So this happened a few years ago when I was working at a warehouse and my sister was still in high school. I would wake up early in the morning, about 5:30 a.m., to get my lunch packed, get a shower, and also get my coworker since we carpool. My sister, she did have to wake up early too, but she got home earlier than I did, and we both had to do the dishes. It was agreed that she would unload the dishwasher, and I had to load it, and if the other dishes didn't fit, I would have to hand wash. The problem was that a lot of the time in the morning, I didn't have time to load it. My sister called me out on it and called me lazy for it. So my mom intervenes and tells her to calm down. We will just move the time to the evening so she can unload in the morning. After that, I would get home around 7:30 to 8 p.m. and I would load the dishwasher. But there were many times when my sister didn't unload it in the morning and she was there longer than I was. So I called her out on it, and her excuse was, I have homework to do, so I couldn't do it. Turns out she was actually just talking to her boyfriend or talking to her friends on Instagram. I got tired of it pretty quickly, especially given the fact that she called me lazy for not getting the dishes done when I was waiting for her to unload the dishwasher. So she told me I just needed to step up and do the dishes myself. Cue Malicious Compliance. I told my mom what she was doing, and we both came to the conclusion that she was trying everything she could to get out of doing the dishes. I told her my plan, and she approved of it. I did unload the dishwasher to load it, but I put all the dishes that were in the dishwasher onto the drying mats instead. I also made sure to stack the dishes in different ways to make it easier to fit more, but had zero organization with it. I did this all before she woke up. By the time she woke up, she saw me loading the dishwasher, and she was smiling that I was doing my job. But then, she got angry once she saw the tall pile of dishes put on just 2 drying mats. She started to yell and scream, which not only woke up our mom, but also our stepfather, who could sleep through anything. And they both agreed that I did my job and was loading the dishwasher. She just needed to put away the dishes. She tried to argue, but I told her, hey, I'm just doing my job, and you agreed that I am to load the dishwasher, and you unload the dishwasher. I can't help it that the dishes were in my way of loading it. She was fuming but couldn't argue about it. She just gave me the death glare while she took a bowl that was on top of a plate, unstacked it, and put it away, and then got the same plate that was under the bowl. She also had to get the silverware out from the Tupperware containers and had to separate the spoons from the forks and knives. She was still unloading when I was heading out to work. After that, she started unloading the dishwasher in the morning, and I loaded it in the evening. OP added an edit down at the bottom. It says, edit, just so you guys know, yes, we have tried punishing her in the past, like taking away phone privileges to the point where the line was cancelled, car privileges and gas card privileges, but nothing worked. So I was honestly surprised that this worked, probably due to the fact that she knew I could do that again, and I would have kept doing it too. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Furky234. It says, why she didn't break down the pile on the counter to sort everything into their own pile, I'll never know. She made so much more work for herself by doing it one by one. OP responded and said, she did make so much work for herself. Why she didn't organize them, I don't know. Maybe she wanted me to feel guilty for making the process more difficult, but I gave 0 Fs that day. Another commenter down below called Photoburger said, I would unplug the dishwasher and make them do it the old-fashioned way for a few weeks. I think the best way to deal with this one in the first place is to have a schedule that swaps back and forth every week, so that one week you're loading the dishwasher, the next week you're unloading the dishwasher. It kind of makes me wonder why people aren't loading the dishwasher after they use the dishes in the first place. I mean, they can sit in there until somebody runs it when it's full, right? So why don't they just pop them all in as they go? This story comes to us from Captain Maxius. Outrank doesn't mean outknow. The other day, my nephew was talking about joining the military, and it reminded me of this incident from my Air Force days about 20 years ago. For a little background, when two people have the same rank, you use the date of rank, DOR, which is the date your new rank became effective, to determine who outranks who. So if one person gets the rank in April and the other in August, then April outranks August. Additionally, people who did time in JROTC, Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps, in high school would be able to be immediately promoted to Airman First Class, E3 or A1C, upon completion of basic training. Those who did not and enlisted started at Airman Basic E1, which is what I did. Fast forward 2 years, and I'm a recently promoted A1C, working as a munitions technician, and had been at my current duty station for over a year. In that time, I had seen and done every munition operation that my shop did, and knew what to do when the equipment decided to not cooperate. A month prior, 2 fresh airmen from basic and tech school arrived, and one of them, who we will call Bob, was sporting A1C stripes. One day, our sergeant orders the 3 of us to process a UALS, Universal Ammunition Loading System. Basically, this is just a big ammunition cylinder on wheels that is used to load the bullets into the guns on the fighter jets. Think Top Gun when they switched to guns. To do this, you attach the head of the UALS to a table that consisted of a metal tray that fed into a little conveyor system that had slots that each bullet fell into, which then fed into corresponding slots in the UALS. The whole thing is run on pneumatics that controlled the speed of the conveyor, and the more you squeezed the trigger, the faster it went. So before we start the operation, Bob says that he is in charge because he outranks me. I shrug my shoulders and basically say, whatever, and we get to work with me controlling the airgun. We get into a pretty steady rhythm with them loading the ammo into the tray, and it is feeding nicely into the UALS. At some point, Bob gets cocky and orders me to speed up. Now, the UALS has this quirk that it does not like to be ran at full speed, or it will jam. When this happens, all you have to do is detach the UALS head and reattach it, making sure this teeny tiny pin is in place. If you don't, then no matter how many times you take it off and put it back, it will still be jammed. Of course, seeing that I have done this exact operation countless times before, I knew this, but Bob was in charge, so away we go. As you can expect, the whole thing jams pretty quickly, and Bob and the other guy are confused why they can't get it running. I just sit there quietly waiting for them. As it goes, what should have been a 15-minute operation takes almost an hour. Our sergeant enters the bay and is surprised that we have not finished yet and decides to investigate. Bob tells him that the machine is jammed and we are trying to fix it. The sergeant glances at me and I simply say, Bob said he was in charge because he outranked me. The sergeant gets a half smirk, which Bob didn't see, because he knows I know how to fix it. He turns to Bob and says, well, if you're in charge, then it's your responsibility. Bob gets flustered and basically tries to backpedal. The sergeant says, "Well, did you ask everyone on your team?" He of course means me, and when Bob shakes his head, he turns to me and says, "OP, do you know how to fix it?" I immediately say, "Yes, sir," and proceed to take 10 seconds to fix the issue and get it running smoothly. Bob, understandably, is subdued, and the sergeant orders us to finish up and places me in charge, but not before telling Bob, outrank doesn't mean outno. The sergeant leaves, and 5 minutes later, we finish. From that day on, Bob never pulled rank on me again. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called TrogdorHD. It says, "Great story. Good leaders learn to say, hey, you know this procedure, right? Mind taking the lead? Then authority and experience are clearly defined and recognized, and the job gets done safely." Alright, I'm not gonna even begin to pretend that I know how military stuff works. Even though I live in the town with Canada's largest Air Force base, I don't work there, so I don't know how that goes. But if somebody's at the same level at you and outranks you by just a couple of months, do you really have to listen to exactly what they say, snap right in line, and not give your opinion? Someone comment down below and let me know exactly how that works, because I have no clue. This story comes to us from Technically Can't 5083. Notify you for every report? Have fun waking up 50 times a night? I saw the previous military post and decided to share my own military malicious compliance story. This story isn't about the US military, but I will use US Army terms. Some background. I spent most of my military service in a Communications Command and Control Center, CC for short, which isn't as glorious as it sounds. It was mostly emails and Excel. Our CC was relatively high in the command chain. We were more big picture, managing the operability of communication systems across the whole military. The ones actually doing the work in the CC are enlisted soldiers, but because the work was relatively important, the commander of the CC was always an officer. At the time of this story, I was an E3 enlisted soldier 3rd rank. I had a lot of time and experience on the job. One day, we got a new commander, an 01 fresh out of officer school. She had a really crappy, "I'm an officer and you must respect me" attitude. I had more time than her in the army, I was also older, and my work involved interacting with officers with much higher ranks than her. So I couldn't give a crap, but I tried playing nice. Our work at the CC had a pretty normal procedure. We'd get some report, say maintenance A starting, something like that would usually be filed away immediately because we knew about it ahead and they usually didn't affect anything. A report like someone dug through a fiber optic cable and a whole post lost internet connection would usually lead us making some phone calls, trying to understand if there are backups, who could fix it and when, and lastly, when we had all of the relevant info, we would notify our commander. She didn't care about that procedure. She wanted to be involved and assert her control. One day, she saw a report on one of our computers that we didn't notify her about yet, so she got really angry and said, "From now on, you're to notify me about every report." Big mistake. The CC worked 24/7, but there was only one commander, so if something really important came up, we would wake her up in the middle of the night, but most stuff was kept to the morning. Well, cue malicious compliance. That night, the night shift woke her up about 10 times, and they were being nice. The day after, she was visibly sleep deprived. I was on the next night shift and called her for every report. Sometimes we'd get multiple a minute. She was basically doing the night shift with me. At around 5 a.m. she said, "Fine, you don't have to report everything. You know what's important and what's not." So for the conclusion, I'm gonna steal Captain Maxius's line, "Outrank doesn't mean outknow. Let your subordinates do their effing job." Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called NiceZombie356. It says, "Your story makes me wonder, although she was a little thick-headed for a couple nights, did she learn her lesson? I bet a lot of officers had a soldier educate them like you did, and eventually turned out just fine thanks to it. Signed, an officer whose soldiers taught me a lot, sometimes the hard way." OP responded and said, "Not really, she learned to let us do our job, but she was always arrogant and demanded unearned respect." In quite a few of the military stories that we've covered on this channel, new officers seem to need to be put into their place at least once so that they know where they really do stand in the hierarchy. If you have any stories about putting an officer or somebody who outranks you into their place, let me know in the comments down below on YouTube or if you're on Spotify. This story comes to us from Sidgewit, Efficient Reporting. I used to work at a large telecommunications company. Above me was my manager Albert, above him manager Barry, above him senior manager Colette, not their real names. My job was to provide management reporting, which I did largely through Excel, with some fairly fancy graphs, some macros, and an array of formulas, including some array formulas. Colette was a young, ambitious manager who knew how to network, say the right things to the right people, and sound confident whether or not she had any clue about whatever she was managing. Consequently, she'd been over-promoted, Peter Principal style, to a role she struggled with. But due to her nature, she continued to act as if she was in control, and wanted to show her excellent management. One of her traits, which I'd witnessed on rare occasions where I, as the data expert in my area, had been invited into a meeting with her to help explain some data issues, was that her reaction to hearing problems was to decide on the spot she needed something to be done, and that she needed to be kept informed of progress on a weekly basis. This might make sense for a serious issue, but not for a minor issue, which she should have just trusted lower-level staff to deal with. Barry was an experienced, ambitious middle manager who wanted promotion to senior management. In his view, and he was probably correct, the way to his goal of promotion was to tell Colette everything she wanted to hear. If Colette had a target to reach 1,000 widgets, Barry would tell her we'd made 1,000 widgets, whether or not we had. Albert had worked at the company for 25 years. He was good at his job, but past caring about fighting to do a good job and just wanted an easy time as he eyed up retirement. If Barry asked him for something daft, he'd say it was daft, but if Barry still wanted it, then he'd instantly capitulate. And at the bottom of the chain, I actually made the reports they wanted. They had no idea how I do this. It's an era where managers in their 40s and 50s grew up without computers and can barely sum a few numbers in Excel without help. They think all the pretty graphs and macros and calculated cells are bona fide magic and have no comprehension of whether a task takes 10 minutes or 10 hours, whether it's manual or automatic. I hated it whenever they had a meeting and Colette would require a new report on something as a knee-jerk reaction. I knew that 90% of the time, by the end of the week, she'd forgotten she'd asked for it, and if the problem wasn't that bad, she'd never even look at them unless it was raised afresh in a new meeting. This particular year, I was extra busy. We'd had redundancies due to the global financial crisis, so I was doing about 2 roles at once. Albert tells me that Barry told him that in their manager's meeting, Colette said she needed a new report run weekly that shows which the top 3 colors of widgets are. I explained to Albert the colors are irrelevant, it's just whatever color comes from the supplier, and they're buried in the ground, so no one sees them anyway. So Colette can't possibly need to care about that at a senior level. Albert agrees, says he's already explained that to Barry, but Barry said that Colette wanted it, so we have to make it anyway. So I make the report. It takes about 40 minutes to run each week because it's a slightly fiddly manual copy and paste from a system we have no budget to automate and export. I put it in the shared folder where Colette can access it and send an email to all 3 of them with a link to the folder. For 8 weeks, I do that, and I hear no mention of it from anyone. I suspect no one is looking at it because Colette probably forgot she asked for it 10 minutes after the meeting in which she asked for it. I explained to Albert I don't have time to keep making these when no one is looking at them anyway. I have other more important things, and they'll be late or low quality if I waste time on this. I have too much on, so can I stop making this report? No, because Barry doesn't want to stop making something Colette asked for. You need to keep making the report. Even though it's not useful anyway, they're probably not even looking at it. Yes, you have to keep making the file weekly. In the folder so far, widget color report week 1.xls, widget color report week 2.xls, widget color report week 3.xls, widget color report week 4.xls, widget color report week 5.xls, widget color report week 6.xls, widget color report week 7.xls, widget color report week 8.xls. What a productive 5 hours spent making all those, I think. 8 files full of pretty graphs that no one will look at. Might as well not have anything. Oh, that week I get a blank Excel file. I changed the text to bold, red, font size 18. Right in the middle of the sheet, I write, error with data upload, data link failed, error code 2387AGT. Then I go to save as, and save it in the folder, widget color report week 9.xls. I mean, technically, I still made a report, right? Because there it is, right there in the folder. A week goes by, nothing said. I copy file v9, paste it in the same folder, and rename the 9 to a 10. Widget color report week 10.xls. Another blank Excel file just saying, error with data upload, data link failed, error code 2387AGT. After about 5 months of copying that same file, I'm doing my 40-minute report in 4 seconds in what is one of my most efficient pieces of work ever. I finally get Albert to review my workload, and he agrees something needs to stop. In addition to some reports I really do make that really do take time and I get to drop, I casually mention, oh, and there's that weekly widget color report. I know Barry still wants it, but I just realized yesterday that there's some problem with the data upload and it's not been working the last few weeks. They don't seem to have noticed though, so perhaps they're not actually looking at it. Albert believes the line about the fictional data upload as it's all technical wizardry to him, so just agrees and says okay, stop making it, and if Barry asks for it again, we'll have to investigate the problem with this data upload. I'm confident we can fix it if needed, probably just needs a bit of Control-C, Control-V work done on it again. I grin. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called OutrageousAd5290. It says, this was a very creative challenge to the management. Love that you found a much faster way to make the report and prove they weren't even reviewing it. Copy, paste, repeat. Sorry that you had wasted so much valuable time before this solution came to mind. I personally love how at the end of this story, OP got really cocky and actually mentioned Control-C, Control-V work. The boss really must be completely blind to all of the technical wizardry that OP mentioned before if they don't even know what copy and paste is. This story comes to us from 0313. If you insist on being in charge, don't F it up. I worked as a night supervisor in a small private psychiatric hospital years ago. Department directors of individual patient units were on site from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. So there was a bit of overlap in supervisory responsibilities between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. The director of the high security acute care unit did not care for me as a supervisor, nor as a human being. She made it very clear that she was in charge until 5 p.m., not sooner. At every chance encounter, she had some snide accusation or remark to make about night shift, whether real, perceived, or imagined. Nothing I ever did was correct or good enough in her mind. One day, the evening supervisor traded shifts with me so she could attend her granddaughter's school play that afternoon. On that day, I received oncoming report from the nursing director, including ongoing construction progress as the facility upgraded its appearance. About 1 hour into the shift, I had completed oncoming rounds on the second floor and had just arrived on the first floor when a fire alarm sounded. The hospital operator announced a code red on the second floor south wing, opposite and 1 floor removed from the acute care unit. It was later discovered the construction workers accidentally set off the alarm. Nobody was to evacuate their area unless in imminent danger, told to do so by a supervisor, or ordered by a member of the fire department. At night, everybody was in their beds, so all staff had to do was a head count and shut all doors. During daylight hours, patients were walking around the halls, in group therapy sessions, or with individual counselors. I instructed the charge nurse to gather all the patients and staff into a large day room, complete the head count, and remain there until the all clear was announced on the intercom. As I started to leave, the unit director entered and demanded to know why all the patients weren't lined up at the door. Stupid, sleep-deprived me didn't understand this was a rhetorical question. I started to explain that this was the safest way to keep track of this population, and they were in no immediate danger. She didn't wait for an answer. She started yelling for everyone to line up at the back door and leave the building. Just then, 2 firefighters arrived and asked me where the exit was to the outside courtyard. I pointed down the hallway to where the director stood with 25 confused patients and staff in front of the exit. The lieutenant got about halfway to the exit, stopped and looked at me and asked, "What the heck are all these people doing blocking the fire exit? Who's in charge here?" I walked up to him, pointed at the director and said, "She is." I immediately turned to walk off the unit, listening to the lieutenant loudly telling her they should be in a room with the doors closed, not blocking an exit. We need to get outside, and you put these people directly in our way. The alarm location isn't anywhere near here. You have multiple barriers and firewalls that must be breached before you must leave, etc., etc. At the next all-management meeting, the hospital administrator announced that in the future, directors will stick to managing their individual department issues. Shift supervisors were to remain in charge of global hospital operations, including managing emergency evacuation of patients during fires and other building threats. The director never spoke to me again. Win-win. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Dur2. It says, "It only takes a life-threatening fire to move some people's ways of thinking. The rules are there to protect the residents, not for your power trip. Trust me, I used to work at a school for the disabled. There is nothing more frustrating than people playing politics when the whole reason for the place existing is for the elderly or disabled. It really gets to me." OP responded and said, "True, I evacuated the same hospital 2 years earlier for a bomb threat at 9 p.m. in the rain. Nobody bothered to come in and help me then. We all got out safely, back inside drenched. A lot of our patients wearing only pajamas or a hospital gown and slippers." Another commenter down below called BookNerd381 said, "I don't know why, but in every place I've ever worked, there are huge issues between the shifts. It's usually better in places where the shifts overlap like yours does. It allows people the time required to humanize the other shift. It blows my mind that you were there working with her for hours a day and she still dehumanized you like that. I'm sorry you dealt with that, but kudos for knowing the proper procedure and for trying to keep those patients safe." Yep, I would have to agree. OP was completely in the right to throw that director under the bus. When it comes to the safety of all the people that you're there for in the first place, I think that matters the most. And the wants and wishes of a director who likes to overstep just don't matter. This story comes to us from Laconic Lacedaemonian. "The best way to kill a bad rule is to follow it to the letter." Policy change. My department, around 200 software engineers, instituted a policy: all code changes must be installed on all servers within 2 weeks, or have manager approval. Context: I work in software at large companies. Eventually, software that is written needs to be deployed to a computer somewhere. Software changes are one of the biggest reasons for bugs or outages. But the way many software companies work is every change increments a version number. Think I'm deploying version 111 to a server somewhere, and if the previous version that was deployed was version 101, that means 10 changes are going out. If one of them fails, we basically need to sift through the changes to find the bug and revert the changes. Deploying regularly is good practice and keeps the amount of code being deployed low and allows us to quickly identify failures. Problem: it was literally impossible to follow this rule as simple code changes implied over 100 deployments. If this sounds insane, it is, but only because it wasn't automated. This meant that pretty much any change required manager approval. I called this out and suggested changing the code such that we could make changes to individual systems at a time. 3 months of work. This was not funded by management. The Malicious Compliance. I blocked literally every change because we're not following policy and made them ask for manager approval. This forced managers to confront the unfollowable policy and to understand the complexity of what they were asking. But they kept approving changes anyway. So I kept it up. Every change was going to follow this policy. Then, management would be forced to 1. Approve the change anyway, 2. Invest in the code changes to isolate services, or 3. Abandon the policy. While there was an initiative for automation, time to delivery was long and only reduced the number of manual actions to about 30. After 9 months and dozens of overrides, a new initiative that was critical required rapid changes. I made a document outlining how many times the policy had been overridden, what could be done to follow the policy, but ultimately recommended that we either invest now in the changes to allow this to work, slow down the critical project to follow policy, or abandon it. It was abandoned. The aftermath. I received an exemplary performance review with people noting my commitment to quality and a champion of this policy. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called the Fluffiest Redditor. It says, "And still no pipelines to automate code deployments? Sigh." I remember talking with the peeps at Envato back in 2015, I think, who were doing tens of code deployments every day with reliable rollback too. They had a mature process 10 years ago, and I'm still seeing organizations struggling with basic code deployment tools now. OP responded and said, "It's more complicated than that. 1. There were 8 different services to deploy across 14 clusters, hence over 100 buttons to push. 2. Bake time overnight was required as we had heterogeneous workloads throughout the day. Some unique important workloads ran at midnight, and catching it in a staging environment was important. We did automate validation, but scale testing would require us to have a test cluster of comparable scale to production. Instead, we simplified our cluster topology to make all clusters similar so ramping would give us the signal we needed. 3. Services were stateful, and one service had over 50,000 machines to deploy to, which meant that we could only take a portion of the fleet down at a time or risk corruption or data loss. So automation would cycle through and do a few hundred at a time, intelligently picked to avoid loss, and you needed to wait for the machines to come back up. We would have a 3% hardware failure rate per year, and generally during deployments, the simple act of restarting would cause some machines to never come back. Then we need to wait for the system to stabilize when this happens, so it's safe for the next batch. This was all automated but took 4 to 48 hours to roll through a cluster of between 2,000 and 12,000 machines each. The best case happy path would be about 2 days and 8 buttons to fully deploy, 1 per service with automated progression through our clusters, and would require us to eliminate 2 entirely. Detection of regressions was the primary reason this didn't get fully automated, but we did add CD to our low-pri clusters. Another commenter did ask OP to dumb this down a bit, so OP responded and said, 1. 14 times 8 is the number of distinct units we needed to update code for. 2. Not all customers do the same things. Some important customers do weird things at midnight, and we don't want to break them, so we wait, or bake, until we are confident and then do the next deploy. If we rushed versus waiting overnight, we would break critical things versus things that don't matter, because we deploy from the least important to the most important. 3. Each of the units we update have data, state, and stateful as compared to stateless. We might have 3 machines with copies of the data. If we deploy and one of them breaks, data is under-replicated, and the system will ensure it gets back to 3 copies automatically. Does anybody else feel like the job here just wasn't being done properly? If it took 9 months and dozens of overrides, to quote OP, to make any changes to the process? Yep, there's a reason I don't work in tech. It's because I would be overly critical of everything, as you all probably know. This story comes to us from Consistent Shoe 9602. Boss yells at me for following instructions and tells me to do the opposite next time, which backfires. About 20 years ago, I used to work as an office assistant at a small company where we would receive orders from clients and then we would assign the work to one of our freelancers, who were well compensated and respectable professionals. My boss was such a professional herself, and when possible, we would assign that work to her. I accepted the minimum wage job because she told me I could sometimes get tasks assigned as a freelancer with the nice freelancer compensation, that she would personally train me, and that in less than a year, I would most likely be promoted to regular freelancer and make very good money. This sounded like a great career path to my young and naive ears. One of the things she had told me in the very beginning was that when you take over an order, you become like a project manager for that order. You need to make sure that the freelancer would finish the work on time, as the work was usually time sensitive. Additionally, she loved going on long lectures about how she is paying me, minimum wage, for me to use my brain and figure things out when necessary. These lectures were mainly a vehicle for her to stroke her own ego by explaining to her employees how our brains were not as smart as hers. One day, our biggest corporate client had placed a large order that was due on a Monday by noon, and we had assigned the task to my boss to do over the weekend. It was Monday morning, time was ticking, and my boss hadn't arrived at the office. The client had called to see if we were going to provide the work soon, as it was urgent. I tried calling my boss, who didn't pick up her mobile. I called half an hour later and texted her. No answer or reply while noon was fast approaching. So I called her landline at home. Her husband picked up, told me she wasn't home, and I explained very briefly why I was trying to get a hold of her. Less than an hour before noon, my boss called furious that I had been so insistent on getting a hold of her and that I had created a state of stress and emergency at her house. Her home number was for emergencies only, and this wasn't an emergency. It's not professional to call people when they're not at work. She told me she got everything under control and she was now sending the work to the client directly. When she arrived at the office, she gave me a big scolding in person and told me that I do need to hound other freelancers, but not her. It was her business, and she got everything handled. She knew all the clients, and they were clients because of her. She looked me in the eye and told me, "If I take over a task, it's not your task anymore, it's my task. You don't need to bother me with reminders. You just give me the instructions from the client, and I'll handle everything myself. From that point on, your job is done. I never ever miss deadlines. If the client calls, you tell them I'm on it, and you don't call me or text me about it." Fair enough. I apologized for the stress and repeated the new instructions back to her for confirmation. She was very happy with that and confirmed I had understood everything. She once more gave me her favorite lecture about how she is paying me, minimum wage, for me to use my brain with a lot of condescending examples of how she always uses her brain, unlike us normal workers. I could only nod along as if her narcissistic rant was actually teaching anybody anything. About a month or so later, another client came in with an order. I accepted it, my boss was available to handle it, so I forwarded everything to her, and I considered my work in regard to that order done as instructed. On the day of the deadline, I was on vacation and was hiking in a remote area with spotty cell coverage. The other office assistant called me and told me the client had called the office to check if the work was ready. I told my colleague that our boss was on it and that we didn't need to worry as our boss was going to handle it, and that my clear instructions were to tell the client our boss was personally on it, the task would be done by the deadline, and explicitly do not call our boss to remind her of the deadline. Then, since I was on vacation, I needed to conserve my battery and everything at the office was handled, I switched off my phone. An approaching deadline that my boss had to meet was explicitly not an emergency. Also, I had recently realized that my boss had knowingly misled me about the career opportunities this job was affording me, so I wasn't going to be on call on my rare day off. While I was hiking without a care in the world, my boss had managed to forget about the deadline. By the time she realized she missed it, the office was closed. My boss had urgently finished the work, but it turned out she didn't know the client so well as she didn't have their contact details. As the order was in the office and my phone was off, she had to go there herself, fetch it, and use the contact details to deliver the work late. This was particularly embarrassing, as my colleague had informed the client our boss was personally doing the work for them. When I came back to work, it was pandemonium. She screamed at me, but I simply pointed out that everything I had done was following her instructions. "Why did you do this? You told me to. Why didn't you do that? You told me not to." She was fuming, but she knew I was correct and I had acted exactly as instructed. She also screamed at me for my phone being off, but I said I needed to conserve my battery for emergencies, and this was clearly not an emergency. And I'm not on call while on vacation anyway. Malicious compliance for the win, right? Well, narcissists never accept blame, and she had an idea of how to shift the blame to me after all. But you didn't provide me with the client's contact details with the order assignment. How could I have delivered them the work? It was your fault for not providing me with all the information. I pointed out that she told me she knew all the clients personally, but if she had used her brain, like she is constantly telling us to, she could have easily noticed that the order instructions were on the client's letterhead with all their contact details spelled out, on every single page, bottom and top. Now, that was a huge slap to her fragile ego, and remembering her face in that moment still makes me smile. Needless to say, I was fired. Of course, I didn't mind. Don't you just love happy endings? Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called CoderJoe1. It says, "My guess is that you got fired for failing to crawl up her butt to make her feel as special as she knew she was. Learning she wasn't special was grounds for dismissal." OP responded and said, "I see you have met my former boss as well." The interesting thing about this story to me was that the boss said that people should never be called at home, but then they were calling OP while they're on vacation. Rules for thee, but not for me. OP did mention in a comment that they got another job within a week, so good for you, OP, on getting that job, and also good for you on putting that boss into their place, even though you got fired. This story comes to us from The Farzin, how I set up my boss by following his own orders. Recently, my friend told me a story from his life that's a perfect fit for malicious compliance, and I decided to share it from his perspective. This happened about 5 years ago, when I was working at a small tech repair shop. Our boss was this guy named Sergey, a classic control freak who thought being the boss made him smarter than everyone else. He didn't know squat about tech, but loved sticking his nose in and telling us how to do our jobs. Usually, us guys in the shop would just nod and do it our way, but this time, I decided to play by his rules, and here's what came of it. We got an order to fix an old industrial printer, rare beast, bulky, barely any manuals, but I'd worked on a couple before, so I knew right away what was wrong. A clog in one of the feed gears, and a worn out belt. Disassemble, clean, swap a few parts, 5 hours top. I laid out the plan for Sergey, he listened, then launched into his usual, "No, you don't get it, it's an electrical issue, you need to check the board, test everything with a multimeter, I'm the boss here, do it my way." I tried explaining it was mechanical, but he started yelling that I was young, cocky, and clueless, and if I didn't follow his orders, I could go home without pay. Fine, I thought, you're the boss, you know best. I grabbed the multimeter, took the printer apart down to the last screw, and started testing every circuit on the board, exactly like he told me. It was slow, tedious, and totally pointless, because I knew from the start the board wasn't the issue. But I didn't just test it, I documented everything for a report, wrote down readings, snapped pictures of every step, even sketched diagrams so Sergey could see how obedient I was. Took me 2 full days when I could have fixed the thing in half a day. Finally, I stroll up to him with a stack of papers and say, "Sergey, checked it all, board's fine, what now?" He turned red as a beet. The client had already called, furious about the delay. At that point, he figured I'd sabotaged him on purpose, though he dug his own grave, and barked at me to deal with the mechanics since you're so smart. I shrugged, went back, cleaned the gears, swapped the belt, the stuff I'd planned to do all along. A day later, the printer was done. Client was happy, but Sergey looked like he'd been through a week-long spin cycle. After that, he tried bossing me around a couple more times, but I'd just ask, "Like with that printer, your way?" And he shut up real quick. Moral of the story, sometimes it's better to let someone dig their own hole than argue. I knew I was right, but I complied out of spite, and he ended up screwing himself. Still crack up thinking about his face after the report. Jumping down to the comments on this one, there's one from a user called Competitive Score 30. It says, "With this one, I could see him being after billable hours, an unethical business practice to be sure, but I'm sure there are plenty out there that will do what they can to drive up the cost." Another commenter down below called Rolling Steel said, "The greatest flaw with so many in current leadership positions is that they forgot what it was like when they were still following fans, and then stopped listening to the input, ideas, and feedback from those that are following them now. When you stop accepting feedback from your fellow team members who are still out there in the field, in the shop, on those phones, etc., you lose connection and ability to be a critical thinker. I've been in both leadership and support roles and always remind everyone to share their input and accept the suggestions received. As a leader, you'll begin to realize who is offering solid intel and useful input, which can only help make the system and the end result that much better. When you stop listening, you stop learning. In a few of the military stories that we read a few days ago, we came across a sentence that said, outrank doesn't mean outknow. And I don't think that's just for military, I think that goes for any working position as well. A boss that outranks their staff definitely doesn't outknow the staff that's doing that same job day in and day out. This story comes to us from Swirling Insanity. Don't like my art? Well, I don't like yours either. I am in college and studying for my extended diploma in art and design. I have a teacher this year who is all about conceptual art and has never drawn a day in her life. To keep this short, I will just list the things she had done before. Told me that my drawings are just copies and are not real art. Told me that anime isn't art and I need to be more realistic. Told my class to use AI art. Told me that my portfolio for university was not enough of me and to remove some of my best work. To put it lightly, this woman gets on my nerves. We were doing an industry-linked project with a local business during our practice project before our final major. She had arranged a visit for the head of the company to come and see our artwork as we were in lesson. She spent 3/4 of an hour looking at 2 people's work in specific. There are 9 of us in that class. And then eventually came over to me and my friends. We all specialize in character creation and concept art, looking at a lot of different animation and cartoons and using those styles. She brought over this woman and said, "These are our character creators. They all really like anime, but we're trying to get them to move away from that and look at some real art." We were shocked that she would just discredit our work in front of the woman who employed us to do work for her business. I am now on our final project. She had told me multiple times on our previous project that you can't just do research on things you like, you need to broaden your research. So I decided to do just that. I made an entire research paper on conceptual art and went into detail discussing an artist's themes and exploring the style of her work and saying how to me it doesn't make sense and that I don't have the same love for it as it seems illogical. I used a lot of points to back up my views and made sure that she couldn't turn it against me. We're also being taken on a trip to a conceptual art gallery that I will be doing the exact same with. She spent the first half of this year discrediting all my hard work and style, so now I will discredit hers. She has seen the research page, but didn't even bother to properly read it, but she said how she likes that I've put myself more open to look at different artists. She had seen how I had spoken about it in her brief look over my work and quickly moved on to the next table, completely forgetting to look at the others' work on my table, but they didn't care and they didn't want to talk to her anyway. I hope she knows how much we all don't like her way of teaching. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Lord Tyvlor. It says, "Her way of teaching? My brother in Christ, she's a bad teacher. You should complain about her bad-mouthing you in front of the industry, if nothing else. Careers live and die on your reputation, possibly more so for artists, and she does not seem to be starting you off well." Another commenter down below called Evil Prodigy 948 said, "Teacher here, this person should not be teaching you. Get your people together, collect evidence, and report her to your dean or whatever supervisor you have. This is ridiculous behavior from an educator." So OP's taking this course so they can expand their horizons, learn more about their craft, and get better money in their industry. But the teacher here is directly shooting them in the foot by talking them down in front of people from the industry. Yeah, they're completely right. This teacher does not belong in the classroom at all. And OP, there is strength in numbers. If you can get other people together and a bunch of you report this, like you said there were 9 people in that class, if you can get even 4 or 5 of them, then the strength in numbers will make something happen. This story comes to us from the Fawns, cold as ice. This happened today at work. I manage a bar and restaurant. We had a long weekend and everyone, to include myself, is noticeably ready for the day to be over, but at this point it had only just started. I had stopped by the gas station on my way in and grabbed a couple of energy drinks and a Powerade to get me through the shift. As I intended to space out the time between them to maximize their effectiveness, I placed the second energy drink and the Powerade in the canned beer well to keep them cold. While placing them in the well, I noticed there is very little ice in them, and we are now currently open for business. As is required from time to time, I approach my bartenders and say, "Hey guys, beer wells are looking light on ice, let's get some more ice on them so our products stay cold." To which I receive some exasperated but light-hearted sighs. We are a pretty relaxed establishment most of the time, providing things get done as they should be. So I pull out my disappointed dad voice and say, "Come on guys, y'all know the drill." Fast forward 5 hours into the shift, and I go to grab my drink. Imagine my surprise when I arrive at the aforementioned beer well with an accompaniment of uproarious laughter to find the well properly iced down, save the very corner I had placed my drinks, which now resembles a scaled model of Mount Everest. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Abbreviations OK178. It says, "Why didn't you help fill the ice if you had time? Or is it more just a power thing for you?" OP responded and said, "It wasn't a power thing, just a procedural thing. The tone may have not been apparent, but I was in no way upset or angry at them. It was a simple reminder to ensure their opening duties were being done." I think this commenter failed to realize that OP is the manager of the bar and restaurant, and it's completely okay for them to remind their staff of what their jobs actually are and what's supposed to be done when they're open and ready for customers. It is pretty obvious with the lighthearted malicious compliance in this story that OP and the workers get along just fine, and they're willing to play little pranks on each other every once in a while too. That to me sounds like a great workplace, although we've only seen a little bit, so we don't know for sure, I'll give you that. This story comes to us from The Farzin. Grill Tyrant tried to hog the spotlight, so I smoked him out with a sneaky twist. I hope you like it. So last summer, I'm at this neighborhood barbecue, sun's out, beers are cold, and I'm ready to flex my smoked ribs game. Think tender, smoky perfection that steals the show. It's a chill potluck vibe, but then this dude, let's call him Karen, crowns himself grill overlord and lays down the law like he's guarding the holy flame. "No one uses the grill but me," he says, flipping burgers like he's on a cooking show. "One dish at a time, mine first, then maybe you'll get a shot." I'm standing there, cooler in hand like, "Bro, it's a huge grill. Can't I just toss my ribs on the side? They need time." "Nope, one at a time, my rules." He's smirking, so I bite my tongue. "Alright, Karen, let's see how this cooks." He does his burger thing, taking forever, while my ribs chill in their marinade. Crowd's eating, but I'm plotting. His turn's done, he waves me in. "Go ahead." Here's where I get petty, and a little sneaky. I'd smoked the ribs at home for a couple hours that morning, low and slow, 3-2-1 style, but just the first stretch. Wrapped 'em tight, brought 'em ready to finish. Not fully pre-cooked, just prepped to win. I fire up the grill, slide the ribs on, and sneak a foil tray of applewood chips in the corner. Smoke rolls out, thick, sweet, pure temptation. Karen's over there chomping on his burger when heads start turning. "What's that smell?" People wander over, noses up, drooling already. I'm brushing sauce, all chill. "Just ribs, takes a bit, hope that's cool." His burgers? Yesterday's news. The mob's around me now, begging for a taste. He storms up, "You're smoking out my grill." One dish at a time, right? I'm just following orders. I flip a rib, smoke curling like a victory flag. He tries to elbow in, "Let me cook." "Nah, my turn's still going, your rule." I stretch it, tending the ribs, tweaking the chips, chatting up the crowd about low and slow magic. Takes over an hour. And by then, Karen's reign is ash. Everyone's piling ribs, raving, while his burger tray sits there, sad and cold. Night ends, host slaps my shoulder. "Dude, you own the grill next time. Say less." Karen thought he'd rule the barbecue, but I smoked him out with a half-cooked plan, and a whole lot of petty. Prep the ribs early? Sure. Worth it to watch him choke on his own rule? Heck yeah. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Reddit user 04334950. It says, I'm fat, so I'd eat cheeseburgers while waiting for ribs. Opie responded and said, you're the legend in my heart. Another commenter down below called NeatTap2274 said, the fact that he thought he could rule the roost by grilling hamburgers is all we need to know about that guy. Alright, I'm on both sides of the fence for this one because there can be some pretty amazing burgers, but usually the overconfident person who thinks that their stuff is the best makes the worst ones possible. Funny how that works. But I also want to mention that doing ribs can be extremely difficult, and it does take skill to get them to come out perfectly. So, OP, good on you. I'd say you won. This story also comes to us from The Farzin. You want the spotlight? Enjoy! In university, we had a team project on programming. I was unlucky with my partner. He kept slacking off and did absolutely nothing. I tried to get him involved, but all I heard was the same thing. I'll do it later. I don't understand, but you're better at this. Okay, fine. I did everything myself. During the defense, I was supposed to present the project and answer questions while he just stood there, nodding and pretending to understand. I even explained the main points to him so he wouldn't look completely lost. And then, just a second before I step forward, this individual jumps in front of me and, throwing over his shoulder, says, I'll do everything, you just enjoy it, and steps onto the stage. Alright, I complied. And it was fun. He crumbled within the first minutes. He stumbled, mixed up terms, and explained the code wrong. The professor started grilling him with questions, and he just dug himself deeper into a hole. Eventually, they turned to me. Can you explain? Without emotion, I replied, sure, as my partner already explained, and gave a clear explanation of the project, looking perfect in contrast to him. I got a great grade. He got penalty assignments and a public dressing down from the professors. And yes, his lady in the audience looked at him as though he died right on stage. And no, this isn't the story where the strong take advantage of the weak. I was a healthy first-year student, and he was a skinny, weak, but overconfident student whose boldness outweighed his physical size. In a comment down below, Opie added a little bit more. It says, by the way, he ultimately failed his exams in the second year and was expelled. Up until that point, he had shown some very ugly behavior. From manipulating insecure girls to making them do his work, to outright parasitism towards other teammates. He was like a cartoonish character whose existence is hard to believe. Alright, on to the comments. We have one from a user with a name that I just can't pronounce. It says, these people exist in virtual courses as well. Whenever there was a group project, you could count on at least one person dropping the ball and ghosting the team. They'd reappear right before the due date, explaining that a family member had cancer and they needed care. So many people with cancer. So they say that college doesn't really prepare you for the working world, but these team assignments with one person not pulling their weight, or multiple people not pulling their weight, and one person doing all the work, well, in my experience, that sounds like quite a few workplaces that I've been in. Fortunately for OP, they weren't graded as a group and got individual grades on the project, because if it was group grading, OP would have been screwed. This story comes to us from Dr. Deadpool. Employees are not allowed to leave the break room on their break. Whatever. This happened a few years ago when I worked at McDonald's. The one I worked in was near a bunch of schools, so most of the staff was high school kids. As summer vacation started, we began having the trouble of an employee getting break and then spending their break eating their meal and conversating with their friends who were still working in the kitchen. It was having a seriously bad effect on productivity, as well as posing quite a few health risks, so our manager finally initiated a rule that if you were on your break, you couldn't leave the break room until your break was over. This went swimmingly until the kids went back to school. We then had a new problem. Short staffing during break cycles meant our ticket times would skyrocket during rushes. Management lifted the rule so that employees on break could clock in early and help out with the rush. However, The district manager didn't like the implications of employees working shortened or no break shifts, and forcefully reinstated the rule. They also doubled down by saying that employees who tried to work during their scheduled break would be written up and or terminated for doing so. Cue malicious compliance. The date was 4/20, a day when nobody wants to be working at any fast food place, much less McDonald's. We had been getting slammed so hard from the open of the store that we called in extra help from other stores, including the regional and district managers. As the break cycle began, the management was pleased with the sub 2-minute ticket times they had managed to maintain. A few breaks through and we were managing well. Then came my break. As soon as I sat down to eat, someone came into the store and ordered 47 double quarter pounders. This was right after the Fresh initiative, where all quarter pounders were made fresh, so this was already a minor panic. Immediately after that order, someone in the drive-thru ordered 75 20-piece nugget meals. The amount of panic in the kitchen was palpable. I was comfortably lounging in a chair, browsing my phone, and enjoying my meal while the kitchen struggled to keep up with the orders. As the ticket times began to soar, the management did exactly as I expected. District manager came into the break room and demanded me to end my break early and help in the kitchen. My response was very simply, "I'm sorry, but according to the rules you made, I can be written up or terminated for completing your request." I then continued browsing my phone, trying to enjoy the last 10 minutes of my break. The regional manager entered the room and said that he would personally terminate me if I didn't do the thing that I wasn't supposed to do. The other employee who was on break with me immediately rose and clocked in, despite still having 10 minutes left on her break. She was written up for breaking the rule after the shift was over, so I felt good sitting in my chair and continuing to ignore them. In the aftermath, the people who made the giant orders took what was made after half an hour and left with refunds for the unmade food, nearly $150 each. Customers who were waiting for smaller orders were compensated with gift cards for their patience, yet many walked out without even getting their orders. We paid out nearly $1,500 in gift cards. Because customers were walking out on orders without collecting them, we had nearly $5,000 in food waste that night. All of the closers went home with nearly 2 bundle boxes of burgers, fries, and nuggets. Regional and district manager were moved to a different region. The rule was edited to say that you were able to clock back in early at the manager's discretion in the event of a rush. Because I was the only employee who held his ground against the regional and district managers during the rush, I was rewarded with free meals and drinks until I moved away from my hometown and couldn't eat at that McDonald's anymore. Although, when I come to visit friends, I occasionally get rung up a manager discount by the few employees who still remember me. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called DillyDally4. It says, "I mean, the issue seems to be with the big orders, not necessarily the break rules. Could one more person really have helped to keep the orders flowing? Seems the customers needed educated on what time they could return to pick up their giant orders, especially if they pulled that crap during rush hour. Easier said than done, I know." Another commenter down below called Spartan B019 said, "Managers should have been in the drive-thru window with an 'I'm sorry sir, but unless we have 24 hours notice, we cannot supply that large of an order. If you'd like to place that order for tomorrow, you'll have to come inside to do so.' But nope, got a effing power trip over your own darn shoelaces right into coupons and refund land, and writing your own employees up for doing what you told them to." Alright, I don't know what the labor laws are wherever OP is, but I know that where I am in Ontario, Canada, for every 5 hours worked, they have to give you a 30-minute unpaid break. So in this case, if they were doing no break shifts that were over 5 hours, where I am, that would be against labor law, and they could get in a lot of trouble for that. In fact, where I am, I think if they interrupt your unpaid break at any time and ask you to clock back in, the clock actually starts over again and they have to pay you for all of the time and give you a new 30-minute unpaid break. That's the rules where I am anyway, but let me know what the rules are where you are in the comments down below. This story comes to us from Chris Happy. Fiscal responsibility. Alright then. About 20 years ago, I worked for a small state agency where supervisors, quality review, and trainers were all the same pay scale, and you could transfer from one area to the other. One of the soups was promoted to area manager, 4 areas in the state, and our office dynamics changed. Normally, these 3 classifications were backups for the security system, manager was fully responsible, and if the manager and all the soups were out of the office, one of us, slightly lesser, reviewers and trainers, was in charge. Fast forward 6 months, upper management scheduled a 2-day training for the manager and the soups. I make the mistake of asking who's in charge while they are gone. New manager looks at me and says, "None of you are in charge since you don't have the fiscal responsibility that I and the soups have." It was said in a put you in your place voice. Me, nearing retirement, thinks, "Cool, one less headache for me." What I said was, "Glad to know that." Fast forward 4 months and it's time to rotate the security system backup team. Manager looks at me and my partner and says that it's QR's turn. I looked at the manager and said, it would seem that if QR doesn't have fiscal responsibility and can't be in charge when management is out, then QR can't be responsible for security backup. My manager opened her mouth, shut her mouth, and turned an interesting hue of red. We get out of the meeting and my partner and the trainers are all happy as I am. The 4 soups, not so much. OP added an edit down at the bottom. It says, edit, security system backup means there is a person who not only sets the alarms at the end of work, but also responds to any calls from the security company. It's manager's responsibility, but if manager's on vacation, somebody has to resolve that issue. The manager had an aversion to answering the phone when off work. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Real Ultimate Papo. It says, love when someone has no other option but to stew in their own stupidity. Even better when their face betrays them. See, now, I tried things like this with my old boss Rick when I was working for him, and it would go over okay for a couple of minutes, but then the rest of the day, he'd treat me even more like crap than he already was. I need to pop in my regular screw you Rick here, because really, screw you Rick. This story comes to us from Matt Hatter 1337. Want your contract upheld? Okay. About 2 years ago, I had a customer complain that we had raised the price of his phone contract. I work for one of the main UK mobile phone companies here as a customer service rep. I've had my fair share of terrible customers and ridiculous requests, but this was the straw that broke my back. So every year, we have a price increase in March. It's the rate of inflation as published in November, plus 3.9%. This is in all contracts. Has been for as long as I've worked there. Every year, we send a letter out in February to let people know. And every year, we get calls asking, what the F is this? Most of the time, I deal with these fairly well. I explain they agreed to it in their contract, and occasionally read the exact part of said contract. What makes it more delicious is if they've bought it in store, they have a physical copy. So I ask, do you see where you signed your name in the box that says, I have read and understand the terms and conditions of the contract? Well, just above there, the box above that says, I understand that as of March, the price will increase by the rate of CPI plus 3.9%. And normally, that ends those arguments. Well, one day, I'd spent all day dealing with these calls, and I get a guy call. Let's call him Kevin. He complains about the price increase, saying how he never agreed to it in his contract, that his contract says it's, let's say, £30. And that's what he agreed to. No more, no less. He would never agree to something where the price was going to change. After the normal back and forth of explaining it, how all companies do it, not just us, petrol, food shops, books, everything, but he was having none of it. Around about the time most people accept and give up, he was still going strong, going in loops, repeating the same argument I've shot down already. At one point he says he never read it, so it shouldn't apply. I asked him, sir, if you don't read the 30-mile-per-hour speed limit sign and do 70 miles per hour there, you will still get stopped by the police. Just because you didn't read it doesn't mean it's not correct. Besides, you signed the box saying that you had read it, so I'm afraid you were aware of it. Now, that was perhaps me allowing my emotions to get in the way, but he did not like that at all. He said if he doesn't get the contract reverted to what he agreed, he would cancel his direct debit and see us in court. Cue malicious compliance. I noticed earlier during the conversation that his contract was actually £60 and that his first 3 months were half price. But the agent who added the discount added an undated 50% discount instead of the 3-month discount that auto removes. Well, given the call was an hour long and I was overdue my break, I finally said, "Okay sir, on this occasion, I am willing to waive the price increase for you and revert your plan to its original agreed upon price. Because I can't stop the increase, I will add a discount of his increase here to the line. And as you've stated, you want your plan to be put back to what you agreed to. So the 50% discount you have has now been removed. The plan is back to £60. He tries to talk, but don't worry sir, we won't be making you repay the backdated discount from the last 12 months. That's not how it works here, so I can confirm that your plan will remain at the agreed price of £60. After a stunned silence, he recovers and asks, "What do I mean £60? I explained that he agreed to a contract at £60 per month, with 3 months half price, but that the wrong 50% discount had in fact been added and had been left on longer than was intended. He told me to leave it alone, not do anything, but it was too late. He had already confirmed he wanted it, and even if he hadn't, we have a system in place to report excessive or incorrect discounts, which I would have been reporting him on. But this was much more enjoyable. In the end, it was escalated to the manager, who stuck by my actions to remove the incorrect discount, and, in fact, removed my discount for the CPI, as its policy not to discount these. It went above her to the executive complaints team, who I followed up with, and noticed he was given a letter of deadlock that he could try taking to the regulators. It felt great. The guy had an incredibly poor attitude, spoke to me like I was his to do with as he wanted, and wanted to spit his day out in a tantrum. I claimed the victory in the name of those who work in a role with direct customer interactions, where they've treated you like nothing, and we're truly horrible people. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Blaze007. It says, "What a crap company thinking CPI plus 4% more every year is reasonable. Malicious compliance was fine, but there's a reason everyone is calling in pissed off." I've worked in a few call centers, and it's really disappointing that you can't say to the customer, "It's not my job to read your contract to you. You signed it. Deal with it." So many people call in irate trying to get a lower price, and that's really not the way to do it. So my advice, even if you're upset with whatever company you're calling into, put a smile on your face and be nice to the person on the other end of the phone, because they've had a crappy day already dealing with people yelling at them all day. If you're that nice person and you treat them with respect, they'll do whatever they can for you. This story comes to us from Snickerdoodle's Rule, Malicious Compliance in response to weaponized incompetence. Okay, I'm new to the page. I want to hear all of your stories or moments of malicious compliance in marriage. Mine is when I asked my husband to move money from another shared bank account to our checking for bills. You guessed it, he didn't move the money. This was the third time that he forgot about it, and I was tired of asking. I watched our checking account go into the negatives with overdraft fees. I confronted him, and he said that I didn't tell him which account, but we only have one main account for both of us to pay bills from. The account is connected to our debit cards. The next day, he went for lunch at Chipotle. As he was checking out, he realized that he didn't have cash or money on his debit card. He called me at least 5 times, asking me to transfer money, since I was near the bank that day. I did transfer money, but not to the account with the debit card, because he didn't say which account. We haven't had any problems with him transferring money since. Opie added a quick edit at the bottom. It says, "Edit, we share all of our bank accounts. I crunch the numbers and can't always be responsible for budgeting and going to the bank and doing transfers." Jumping to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Timmy the Fourth. It says, Good on you. Those kind of BS excuses drive me bonkers. Spouses need to live up to their responsibilities or get a dose of their own medicine. Opie responded and said, drives me insane. Is anybody else like me and still hung up on the part of this story where they actually had to go into the bank to transfer funds from one account to another? I can't remember the last time I went into a bank to do that because everything's been online for as long as I can remember. Even my 75-year-old parents do all of their banking online these days, so age isn't an excuse here. Anyway, OP, if hubby's just not pulling his weight financially and getting things where they need to be, make sure all of his bills are just coming out of his own account. That way, when he forgets to move money around, it'll be his services that get cut off and not yours. Before we get into the next story, I've got a quick word from me. That's right, this episode is proudly sponsored by my 3D printing shop, dangly3d.com, where I make awesome stuff like Carmen Chameleon, who's always clutching his chocolate chip cookie like it's the last snack on earth. And yes, I've told you before, if you subscribe, Carmen might just share his cookie with you. But let's be honest, he's a greedy little lizard. So if you want one of your own, you'll have to head over to dangly3d.com and adopt him. We've also got articulated dragons, fidget clickers, keychains. Basically, if it's fun and 3D printed, it's probably hanging out on my site. Go check it out, support the channel, and get something cool. Now, back to the stories. This story comes to us from No Madness, bucking a software trend in 1980. 45 years ago, I spent a few months as a software engineer for a Midwest company that built industrial control systems, writing assembler for an embedded micro. Management had gone to a seminar on structured design, the latest software trend, and got religion. My manager, Jerry, called me into his office and asked to see my work. He was not a programmer, but sure, whatever, here you go. I handed him my listing, about a half-inch thick, and forgot all about it. A few days later, he called me into his office, which always reeked of cigarette smoke. "You've got some work to do," he snapped, furious. I looked down at his desk, and my 8085 macro assembler listing was heavily annotated in red pencil, with every jump instruction circled. "This is now a go-to less shop. You've got to get these out of here." "Jerry, this is assembler code. That's different from high-level language." "I don't want a bunch of gosh darn excuses. You have 2 weeks. "Well, shoot. This is ridiculous." I stared at the code for a while, then got a flash of inspiration and set to work. Every place there was a jump, conditional or unconditional, I put the target address into the HL register, did an SPHL to copy it to the stack pointer, then did a return followed by a form feed and a title block describing the new module. The flow of control was absolutely unchanged, although with a few extra instructions, it was marginally slower. The machine was controlling giant industrial batching equipment, so that wouldn't matter. I dropped the listing, now almost 2 inches thick, onto Jerry's desk and went home. He would either spot the joke and respond with anger, or, hopefully, be convinced that I had magically converted the program into a proper structured design application. Some of those title blocks were pretty fanciful. He bought it. Suddenly, I was an expert software engineer versed in Jordan and Constantine principles, and the application made it into distribution. Around the same time, I quit to working full-time on my engineering textbook and other fun projects, and forgot all about it. Until 3 years later, when I was pedaling across the United States on a computerized recumbent bicycle. I got a message from a new employee of the company who was charged with maintenance of the legacy system, and he was trying to make sense of my listing. I called him back from a payphone in Texas. He sounded bewildered. "Did you write this? What are you, I don't understand, what are you actually doing here?" "There's only one thing you have to know," I said, then went on to relate the tale of Jerry and the structured design hack. By the end, he was practically rolling on the floor and told me they had long since fired that guy. He now shared my secret about virtual software modules and promised not to tell. but it's been almost half a century, so I guess it's okay now. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called ReasonableFeed9805. It says, "Gone on a seminar, come back with religion." Man, I like that. I've tried so many times to find a simple way of explaining that when we've had Manglement go somewhere and come back fixated on a new strategy they clearly must implement, but where the actual reasoning and working principles behind it are totally lost on them. That's my new phrase right there. Another commenter down below that I think a lot of us can sympathize with is called Peppermint Biscuit, and they said, "I understood none of the details, but enjoyed it very much. Management is the same everywhere." Okay, I have to admit that the first time I read this story, I didn't understand it myself. But the long story short is, boss went to a retreat, boss was told a new way to do things, boss said that was the only way to do things, and OP had to change his programming to match what the boss wanted. So OP complied in a way that made it do the exact same thing. This story comes to us from, and I'm sorry if I butcher this, Baihi Kipian? Do it your way? Okay. I work in healthcare, taking care of clients at a residential facility. Upper management thought we were going through too many trash bags, so they put them in a locked cabinet, and we had to ask the LVN to give us X amount for each shift. But that isn't the issue. You see, when it's my turn to add new bags, I like to do it at the start of my shift. There's little to no trash, and it's easy to put a new bag on top of the old one, and it'll be quick and easy to take the trash out at the end of the shift. One of my coworkers had an issue with this though. When I asked the LVN on shift for bags one day, they were still doing a lot of end of shift paperwork. My coworker told me, "No, you have to do the other chores first." And the LVN decided not to get the bags for me, which meant when I finally got to the trash, they were all filled with something or other, and I had to wrestle with them. Because PM shift likes to tie the bags around the garbage lid hinge. Irritating as heck, but fine. We'll do it your way. The NOC shift likes to use grocery bags on some of the smaller trash cans too. So yesterday I'm working and the same coworker tells me they put grocery bags on some of the cans and that I only needed 6 bags and to give an extra one to client 4's room. We have 12 trash cans and they only put out 5 bags. So I listened to them and put bags in most of the cans. Anyways, at the end of the shift, one can was without a bag, and AM shift was unhappy with us. My coworkers tried to blame me, and I reminded them that I followed coworkers' instructions. Then they started arguing with each other on if client 4's room needed 2 bags or not. Not the best story, but I wanted to get it off my chest. OP added an edit down at the bottom. It says, "Edit to clarify, there are 4 roles. At any point during shift, role 1 puts a new trash bag in the trash can. At the end of shift, role 1 and role 2 take out the trash. Since a new bag was already underneath it, we don't have to put another bag in during the end of shift rush. We do it this way because the end of shift duties are chaotic and clients are waking up and require attention. I only prefer to do it at the start instead of middle shift. So I'm struggling to take out and put back in a half bag full of trash. And I don't want to dig out the old trash and put in the new bag like my coworkers do. We're gloved, but I still don't want to dig out trash that might have medical waste." Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Electronic Amphibian 7. It says, "Wait, so you put bags on top of the trash bags? Is there trash in them? And then when your shift is closing, you just take out the bags and trash from your shift and leave the other bags that already had trash in them underneath? Or do you leave the double bags of trash for the next shift? Or are you just taking care of the trash when it doesn't need to and wasting bags and putting the burden onto the next shift? Exactly what is happening here? I don't see how you're in the right either way." OP responded and said, "No, if there's trash in it, I still take it out and put the new bag under. I do it at the start of shift, so the likelihood of it already having trash is minimal. If I wait until the middle of shift like my coworkers, the trash is usually half full, and trying to untie the bag and wrestle with the weird wrap lid is an issue, and I'm not a fan of digging the trash out and putting it in a new bag like my coworkers are. Then at the end of shift, we go around and take the full bags of trash out to the bins. Since we already put new bags in earlier in the night, we don't have to put the new bag in while we're rushing to finish the end of shift duties. Okay, in case anybody is still a little bit lost on this one like I kinda was, OP is frustrated because they're trying to be efficient, but their coworkers keep getting in the way and causing confusion. That's basically the whole story. This story comes to us from Designer Coach 4890. Don't annoy me and ask for a 5-star rating. This happened in the 90s when no one had caller ID. My friend Jenny, female, about 35, was a stay-at-home mom, and her husband Walter, male, about 40, worked long hours commuting by train to the big city. Walter owned a BMW and dropped it off for service early morning at the dealership that was close to his train station. The dealership gave him a ride to the station. That evening, Walter picked up the car and returned home. No problem, right? The nightmare began days later. The first call came from whatever marketing company BMW had hired to conduct their surveys. Jenny answered, but they wouldn't accept her feedback, wanting only to speak to Walter. Jenny requested they call back in the evening to speak with him. That night, when they called, Walter was tired and didn't want to deal with it, so he asked Jenny to tell them he wasn't going to respond. They replied that they would call again another time. The phone calls came multiple times a week for over a month asking to speak with Walter, but he refused to answer. Jenny begged the first marketing company to stop calling, and then Walter to just answer their survey. This was driving her crazy. Jenny swears they called no fewer than 30 times. Finally, Jenny went down to the dealership to ask them to stop the phone calls. The lady at the desk was a bit snippy and said she couldn't help. Luckily, Jenny noticed a very large sign requesting that customers who were not going to give a 5-star rating to call and speak to the GM. The next time the survey call came asking for Walter, Jenny replied, "Speaking." Survey woman said, "I'm calling for Walter." Jenny says, "That's me." Survey woman says, "I'm calling for Walter." Jenny says, "Are you making fun of my name?" Survey woman says, "Oh no, of course not." The survey was given and Jenny didn't give them anything higher than 3 stars on any question. Is this malicious compliance? I hope so. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called FirmPage4451. It says, "Brilliant. I pretended to be my wife once to end a subscription with a UK supermarket delivery firm. Clearly, I know enough to pass the ID checks. Poor chap on the phone queried whether I was actually a woman in a polite way. I challenged back saying, 'Are you saying I don't sound as you expected?'" Another commenter down below called Paul DNAP said, "Well done. I think more people need to be malicious with the endless quest for feedback and validation that seems to rot everything you do these days. The part of the charade I despise the most is when they ask you for a rating on 1 to 10 and then follow it with a text box. Please explain why you gave that rating. I often say, you asked a question, and that was my answer." You know, funnily enough on this last comment here, I probably shouldn't admit this, but sometimes when I get a survey, I purposely mark the score down just a little bit because I'm annoyed that I had to do your survey. Before you asked me to do that, I would have rated your service a 10, but now because I had to fill out your stupid survey, it's a 7. This story comes to us from SM Anya. "Okay, you want me to follow company policy? I got you. I finally have my own malicious compliance story. I am a sales manager at a sales company with payment options for those who can't afford items at retail cash price at one setting. We have payment arrangements where if the card runs automatically, we can arrange smaller but more frequent payments in an effort to be more flexible. But since it's an automated computer system, we cannot make changes to it once it starts running due to it running the card 3 times at different times of the day. If the card declines the first time, my accounts team will right away call the customer in case the customer forgot to unlock the card or deposit money. This is where the customer is angry she's contacted. The customer tells the associate she wants to talk to her manager, so she's transferred to the general manager because the accounts manager is off. But the general manager doesn't even get to walk around the counter before the angry customer hangs up. So the general manager leaves on her lunch. 15 minutes later, I, the sales manager, answer the phone where angry customer is already losing it, and by chain of command, I have to get it, and no longer have another person to transfer her to in store. The conversation. I'm trying to change my card on my profile, but it won't let me. I apologize. Let me help you because it does charge you in order to make changes, but if I do it, then it won't. I had a fraud, so I had to get a new card. It's stupid it won't let me change it, and that girl who called earlier is trying to overcharge me. Okay, give me your account details. She gives her account details. Okay, you have a due amount of $85, but I can take your arranged amount plus your late fee, making it $79. That's not my normal payment. My normal payment is $75. Yes, ma'am, but there's a late fee since your account was due on the 1st and your arrangement was due today, and it didn't go through. No, my due date was today. Sorry, ma'am, but all accounts are due on the 1st or the 15th. But if you make an arrangement and the computer processes it, then it waives all late fees. Otherwise, a manager has to do it since the machine doesn't allow you to waive them when you have to make manual payments, referring to the associate not being able to take less than $85. Angry customer continues on the same tangent. I speak to my coworker while she's on mute. Oh my gosh, I'm just gonna waive her late fee and take her payment of $75 to shut her up. This is stupid. Let me talk to the GM. Ma'am, I can just help you. Going to take just the $75 and just interrupted. I want to talk to the GM. I tried to help her because the GM will get rude and often causes me to lose customers. Okay, but she's going to tell you the same thing if I help you. I was interrupted again before I can get to waiving fees. Just have the GM call me, and she hangs up. Me and coworkers start laughing because we know our GM, and she will not only take our side, but isn't afraid to put her in her place. Our GM has a severe case of resting bee-face on good days. 15 minutes later, angry customer nearly drives through our glass windows on how fast she came in and slammed the door. I was joking to an associate, "Who you piss off now?" not knowing it was me. I need a manager. That's me. How can I help you? I just spoke with the rudest person ever. She had a really bad attitude and doesn't know how to treat customers. Me thinking the associate is going to need some help learning to talk with customers. Okay, who did you talk to? Karen. I'm confused because we didn't have anyone by that name. I'm sorry, we don't have anyone working here by that name. No, I'm Karen. Karen McCarran. I realized she's the customer I just dealt with. Who did I speak with because she was stupid and rude and I want her out now? That would be me. And you're the manager? Yes, ma'am. And like I told you on the phone, due dates are on the 1st and 15th. Your payment arrangement is not a due date. It's your arranged date of payment. If you honor it, there aren't late fees. No, my due date is today. I don't get any late fees. Taking out her wallet. Sorry, but the computer just does what it's told, and the arrangement was on that card. Fine, but I'm talking to your boss. Throws 4 20s at me for the arranged amount plus late fee. Sorry, but that's only if your card goes through as the arrangement called for. Your normal amount is $80 plus late fees, so it's $85. Since she's talking to my boss, I have to go by the book, so I can't take off fees or go with arrangements. Angry customers getting louder. Is there a corporate number I can call? You don't know how to do your job, nor how to treat a customer. I've been here many years, and never have I ever been talked to like this. She throws the rest in $1 bills at me. Coworker and associate all confused as they witness the whole thing, including phone call, knowing I never raised my voice or was impolite to her. Yes, ma'am, you see that number in the frame above the office? That is the number. Don't be snotty with me. What's your name? I'm over it by this point. Here, let me write it down for you. I take out my tiny ADHD notebook and tear out a piece. I write my first and last name with job title and hand it to her. Which one? Referring to the number. Coworker, tired of her BS and her yelling, grabs the frame off the wall. He's 6'2" and puts it in her face. Angry customer then takes a picture of it and continues to rant. You will be hearing from them. Okay, thank you. You should dress better and try some makeup. You look ragged and ghetto. Look at the girly associate. She looks more like a manager than you do. Probably can do your job better, stupid butt B. Just wait for me to catch you outside. Me in my uniform with my natural hair and great skin answers her, "Okay, thank you," waving goodbye. My coworkers, aka the delivery guys and associate, were very confused on what just happened, and coworker who put the frame in her face said, "Didn't you say you were going to waive her fees?" Yeah, but she didn't let me get far enough to help her. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Illuminatus Prime. It says, "Incidents like this are why I hated my first and only retail job. You just can't help some people, no matter how hard you try." I love customers like this. These are the ones that you just kill with kindness because they're being rude to you, they're all in a huff, and you're just sitting back going, "Okay then, well, I'm sure I can help you." And then when they ask for the corporate phone number, you give them 1-800, eat shit. This story reminds me of when I was working for Rick because a customer would come in, ask to speak to the manager being completely irate, they would talk to Rick, and he would bend over backwards and give them everything they wanted. It was almost like they were getting rewarded for treating the employees in the store like absolute crap. But he was the boss and he had to look like the good guy. And it didn't matter if that put the employees down. Ugh, screw you, Rick. Screw you. This story comes to us from Araxis Denasia, on the receiving end by private individual. Thought I'd share a minor one that I was the victim of. At the time, I was working in the secondhand goods trade. When people bought items from us valued over a certain amount, the system would require us to take down the name and address of people, though it didn't have to be a formal presentation of ID. Some people really didn't like it when we asked for their details, even if I told them that they could just make it up due to the informal nature of it. An older gentleman, who I'll call Bob, came in and wanted to buy a couple of coins. Individually, they were under the amount, but together they exceeded it. So I asked for his details. "What do you need my name for?" "Store policy. Transactions over a certain amount require me to take your name and address, as we're a second-hand dealer." "What's the amount?" I tell him. "So I'll just buy them individually then." I wasn't about to try and start an argument about it, so I just proceeded with the individual transactions. A little annoying, yes, but he was technically correct. Jumping down to the comments on this one, there's one from a user called Piehole. It says, that's a weird one to me. We have laws about needing to provide information when selling goods to a pawn shop or used goods store, but buying from one seems a bit daft and unnecessary. OP responded and said, honestly, not something I understood either. I was informed it was all part of legislation, but I couldn't find anything regarding buying in there. Just when people were selling to us. It did help to process warranties if people inevitably lost their receipts. There's a pretty easy way to deal with this one. They're not asking for ID, so you just give them a fake name, like, yeah, my name is Mr. or Mrs. Cash Sale. And my address? Oh yeah, no problem. That's 1060 West Addison, Chicago. I have the best lawn in the whole city. Comment down below if you know what that address is without looking it up. This story comes to us from Zodiac72826. My manager told me I needed to offer to help everyone carry their groceries to the car. Sounds good. This is probably super mild compared to most things posted here, but I just remembered it and it made me laugh, so here goes. When I was in high school, far longer ago than I care to admit, I was a bagger at a local grocery store. One of the policies of the store was that we had to offer to help everyone take their groceries out to their car. Anytime someone elderly or someone with a lot of bags came through the line, I would offer to help, and many of them accepted. There were a lot of parents with kids that turned down the help because they would make their clones help instead. I quickly learned who was going to accept the offer and who wasn't. So if they fit the criteria for not being interested in help, I didn't bother to ask. They always refused, so why keep asking? Well, one day my manager is hovering while I'm bagging, and a lady bought a carton of eggs and a loaf of bread. I smiled and wished her a nice day, handing her the single featherweight bag, and she smiled and returned the greeting, and was on her way. My manager noticed I didn't offer to help her out, and scolded me, and I just pointed out she had one partially filled bag that was super light, so probably wouldn't have needed help. He emphasized it was the store policy, and I needed to offer to help everyone. The next guy in the line was definitely a gym rat, a foot taller than me, biceps as big as my head, a tight tank top and basketball shorts. It's been so long I can't remember what he bought, but it occupied a single bag and wasn't heavy. I double bagged it, still in front of my hovering manager, and said, "Sir, would you like me to help you carry all of your groceries out to your car?" He laughed, saw I wasn't also laughing, and his expression changed to utter confusion. He looked at me like I'd just asked him what shampoo he used on his armpit hair. It was 95% confusion, 5% suspicion at what game I could be playing with him. He looked at my manager with a new look and said, "Is this kid okay?" Then turned back to me, still chuckling a little bit in confusion, and said, nah man, I think I got it." He took his bag of protein powder and eggs, or whatever it actually was, and walked out, shaking his head. I looked at my manager and shrugged. His expression read as, "Yeah, alright, fine," and he went back to the office. He never hovered or enforced the policy again after that. Like I said, super mild and short compared to a lot of posts on here, but it was my first case of malicious compliance, so hopefully you guys got a laugh out of it as well. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Kipster Dude. It says, "It never dawned on me for some reason that it might be store policy. I used to wonder why grocery store baggers would offer to help me bring a gallon of milk to the car." Okay, personal experience on this one because my first job when I was 15 or 16 or somewhere around there was as a front-end clerk, a bagger, and a cart collector at a grocery store. And I can tell you, for some people, I'd ask them if they wanted help getting their groceries to their car, just so I could get away and get outside for a few minutes. I definitely had a few regular customers who I told this when I was outside with them, and so they would do this on a regular basis. I really wouldn't have to do much. I would just walk outside with them, carrying their bags for them of course, but they'd put them in the car themselves. They knew I just needed a break, and they were happy to give me one. This story comes to us from The Farzin. "Shredded my goose pick? My homie crushed his boss's rules and exposed his dirty secret." My friend Idris recently shared this wild story from his first job, and I'm still shook. Idris was 17 when he started at this grimy call center. Back home, he's got a whole crew of geese in his yard. He's obsessed with them, treats them like pets, and has a favorite named Blinchek, Russian for pancake. He brought a little wallet-sized photo of Blinchek to work, just to keep his spirits up in that depressing dump. But his boss, Dave, saw it and flipped out. Dave had this hardcore rule: no personal items on your desk, it's about professionalism. Meanwhile, his own desk was a trash heap. Old mugs, random figurines, even some rusty fish statue. Idris says Dave had these weird tics. He'd go from passive-aggressive whispers to fake nice vibes in a heartbeat. Total oddball. Anyway, Dave clocked the goose photo and went nuclear. He made Idris rip it to shreds in front of everyone, muttering about rule breaking. Idris, just a 17-year-old kid, froze. He had no clue how to stand up for himself back then, and just did it. He says he almost cried, but held it together so he wouldn't look weak in front of them. Blinchek's photo was toast, and Dave smirked like he'd just won something. Idris wasn't letting it slide. "Dave wants me to obey? I'll maliciously comply with him." Next day, he rolled in with nothing. No pen, no notepad, no headset. When Dave asked what the deal was, Idris hit him with, "You said no personal items. I'm waiting for the company to hook me up." Dave lost it, but Idris doubled down. "It's your rule." The team jumped in, half of them stopped bringing their stuff too, and the whole operation tanked. Customers were raging on the phones, calls were dropping, and Dave was scrambling to make everyone work normally. Eventually, he caved and mumbled, "Fine, bring what you need, just keep it low key." Idris came back with a fresh Blinchek photo and slapped it on his desk. Dave didn't say squat. But it gets crazier. A couple weeks later, Dave tried to fire Idris for insubordination. Idris, now sharper, had recorded the whole no personal items freakout on his phone, legal where we're at, and sent it to HR with a rundown of Dave's hypocrisy. HR didn't axe Dave, but they gave him a slap on the wrist, and he chilled out. Then the real bomb hit. Turns out Dave had been skimming cash from the petty cash box for years. Small grabs, but steady. Idris says he cooked up the rule obsession to keep everyone stressed and off his trail. He'd snag money from the drawer, supposedly for coffee, paper, office junk, and mark it as office needs. It added up to a hefty chunk, though no one's dropped an exact number. His weird mix of passive-aggressive jabs and over-the-top strictness kept newbies like Idris too spooked to dig deeper. That photo meltdown, Idris figures Dave was just flexing to throw everyone off his scent. Dave got busted when a senior coworker noticed the office expenses weren't lining up. They canned him, and later even filed charges. Idris says he's still stoked about how he accidentally took down a crook by playing Dave's own dumb game. Blinchik's still sitting in his yard with the rest of the geese, honking at anyone who steps too close. So Reddit, what's the call? Is Idris the king of payback? Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Zorby1. It says, Dave screwed himself by getting folks to hate him. I doubt anyone would have noticed the skimming unless it came up in an audit. As for the senior coworker, he may have noticed the discrepancy or simply didn't like Dave and figured he's worth watching for violations, and he got lucky. A good manager doesn't make a spectacle out of enforcing the rules with one employee, but in Dave's case, it looks like they just wanted to get all the attention they could because they're the manager, and everybody should look up to them. Fortunately, with managers like this, it usually is only a matter of time before somebody puts them in their place. Dave just made it easier by committing fireable offenses that somebody found out about. And that's where we'll leave it for today, with a teenage goose whisperer outsmarting his power-tripping boss, exposing his fraud, and walking away like a legend. If you're listening on the podcast, hit that follow button, and if you're on YouTube, smash that subscribe button harder than Dave smashed the petty cash. I thank you for watching and listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.